Before we begin tonight's stories, I just want to say thank you for being here. Ranger Screams truly needs your support right now. If you enjoy these stories, help us reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments on this video. Every like and every comment means a lot and helps me continue creating more terrifying stories for you. Now turn down the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. Search and rescue missions are never exactly easy. They can prove to be incredibly emotionally and physically difficult at times. Along with managing a team and making sure everybody is diehard and on the same page as you, and managing a team can be even more difficult. Not only is it incredibly strenuous, but it also drains resources, time, and everyone's emotional energy. This search and rescue mission had been no different when we had come across an abandoned campsite. There were 7 campers in total who had been now reported missing, and this was right in the middle of a national park that is known to have extremely dangerous weather patterns. And even lately, even more so with the unpredictable weather. There had been a storm brewing coming in from the west when we began working our way higher up ground. The call had come in at 3:17 a.m. I remember because I'd just managed to fall asleep after a 20-hour shift the day before. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, illuminating the darkened bedroom with its harsh blue light. My wife Caroline stirred beside me but didn't wake. She'd grown accustomed to these late-night interruptions over our 12 years of marriage. "Mitchell," I answered, my voice thick with sleep. "John, it's Pete. We've got a situation at Blackwood Ridge." Pete Danvers was the park's lead ranger, and he never called unless it was serious. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, already reaching for my clothes. "How many?" "7. Group of friends on a weekend camping trip. Should have checked in with the ranger station yesterday afternoon. Never showed." I rubbed my eyes, processing the information. "Weather status, not good. Storm system moving in from the west. Weather services predicting heavy snowfall by tomorrow afternoon. Temperatures already dropping." "Shit," I muttered. Blackwood National Park was unforgiving on the best of days. With a storm coming in, we'd be racing against more than just time. Any comms from them at all? Nothing since they registered their campsite location 3 days ago. Last known position was near Crater Lake, about 7 miles in from the east entrance. "I'll assemble the team. Meet at base in 40. "Copy that." I ended the call and finished dressing in silence, my mind already mapping out the search grid, calculating resources, and assembling the team roster. As search and rescue coordinator for Blackwood County, I'd overseen hundreds of operations over the past 15 years, some successful, others less so. The mountains didn't give up their victims easily. Caroline's voice came from the darkness. "Be careful out there, John." I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Always am. Go back to sleep. Bring them home," she whispered as I headed for the door. "I'll try," I answered. The same exchange we'd had countless times before. The drive to the SAR headquarters took 20 minutes along empty pre-dawn roads. The temperature gauge in my truck showed 28 FF, and I could see my breath inside the cab until the heater finally kicked in. By the time I pulled into the lot, several vehicles were already there, the core team members responding to my text alert. Inside, the operations room buzzed with quiet efficiency as my team prepared. Maps were being unfurled, equipment checked, and communication protocols established. Melissa Chen, my second-in-command and best tracker, looked up as I entered. 7 missing near Crater Lake," she said. Not a question, but a confirmation. I nodded, shrugging off my jacket. "Pete's bringing the details. Storm system moving in fast. Timer's already running," she replied, tapping her watch. The unspoken reality hung in the air between us. In these temperatures, with a storm approaching, the missing hikers had perhaps 48 hours before hypothermia claimed them. And that was assuming they were uninjured and properly equipped. Pete arrived 10 minutes later with the missing persons information. The 7 hikers were friends from college: Jason Mercer, 31, Eliza Carpenter, 30, Daniel and Sophia Rodriguez, both 32, Trevor Winters, 33, Alyssa Newman, 29, and Kyle Braddock, 31. All were experienced outdoors people with several previous trips to Blackwood under their belts. "Last communication?" I asked, studying their registration forms. "Jason texted his girlfriend 3 days ago," Pete said, sliding his phone across to me. "Said they'd made camp and were going to explore some caves they'd found nearby." I read the message. "Made it to the spot. Found some cool caves not on any maps. Going to check them out tomorrow. Service spotty, but we'll call when back in range. Love you." "Caves?" I looked up at Pete. "There aren't any major cave systems in that sector." Pete shrugged. "Nothing in our official records. But you know how Blackwood is. The geology's always shifting, especially with all the seismic activity lately." He wasn't wrong. The park sat along a minor fault line, and we'd recorded increased tremor activity over the past year. Nothing major, but enough to potentially open new sinkholes or cave entrances. By 5 a.m., we had assembled our full team: 12 searchers, 4 handlers with search dogs, a medic, and a communications specialist. The morning briefing was quick and to the point. We'd deploy in 3 teams, covering the area in a systematic grid pattern, starting from the hiker's last known location. "Remember," I told them, "the clock is ticking and Mother Nature isn't on our side. Stay in radio contact, check in every 30 minutes, and if you find anything at all, report it immediately. These people are counting on us." We loaded into the Park Service vehicles and headed out as the first hints of dawn crept over the eastern ridge. The forecast had worsened overnight. The storm was now expected to hit by nightfall, rather than the following afternoon. Every minute counted. The drive to the east entrance took an hour, and another 2 hours of hiking brought us to the coordinates of the registered campsite. The rising sun did little to warm the air, which felt brittle with cold. My breath formed thick clouds with each exhale, and the trees around us creaked and groaned under the weight of ice that had formed during the night. "Spread out," I ordered as we approached the clearing. "Standard search pattern. Document everything." The campsite appeared as an eerie tableau when we entered the small clearing. 3 tents stood in a semicircle around a long-dead fire pit. A cooking station had been set up on a flat rock, with pots and utensils neatly arranged. Backpacks rested against tree trunks, and hiking boots were paired outside tent entrances. It looked as though the campers had stepped away momentarily and would return at any second, except they wouldn't. I'd seen enough abandoned sites to recognize the stillness of a place where something had gone wrong. "No signs of wildlife disturbance," Melissa noted, crouching to examine the ground. "No drag marks, no blood. Tents are all zipped up," called Ryan, one of our newer team members. "Sleeping bags inside, personal items untouched." I moved to the center of the site, turning slowly to take it all in. "Check the packs, look for their phones, emergency equipment." The team methodically went through the campsite, documenting and cataloging. All 7 backpacks were accounted for, containing personal items, extra clothing, and emergency supplies. 6 phones were found powered off in the tents, presumably to conserve battery in an area with little to no service. "1 phone missing," reported Melissa. "Based on the personal items, it's probably Jason Mercer's." I nodded, processing this information. "So they all left their gear, their shelter, most of their phones, and disappeared without signs of struggle." "Looks that way," Melissa agreed. "Either they intended to return quickly, or..." She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. In our line of work, unfinished scenarios rarely had happy endings. "What about those caves Jason mentioned?" asked Pete, who had joined our team for the search. I pulled out my topographical map of the area. Nothing marked within a 3-mile radius, but if they found something new, the dogs might be able to pick up a trail, suggested Carlos, our lead K9 handler. His German Shepherd Rusty was already circling the perimeter of the campsite, nose to the ground. "Get them working," I agreed. "The rest of you, continue processing the site. I want to know everything about these people and what might have happened here." For the next hour, we documented every detail of the abandoned campsite while the dog teams worked to establish a scent trail. The scene became increasingly puzzling the more we examined it. Food had been prepared but not eaten. Journal entries stopped mid-sentence. A camera contained photos from the first day and a half of their trip, showing smiling faces against scenic backdrops, but nothing that indicated distress or danger. The last photo showed Jason pointing excitedly toward something off-camera, time-stamped 2:17 p.m. 2 days earlier. The image was slightly blurred, but his expression was clear, a mixture of wonder and surprise. "John!" Carlos's voice crackled over the radio. "Dogs have something, about 200 yards northeast of your position." I keyed my radio. On my way. As I made my way through the dense forest, following the sound of excited barking, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. 15 years of search and rescue had given me a sixth sense for when something wasn't right, and something about this case felt fundamentally wrong from the start. Little did I know how deep that wrongness went, or how it would haunt me in the months and years to come. Looking for any signs or traces of life. There is no cell service here, so if one were to be injured or lost, it's basically impossible to contact anybody unless you can manage to climb to higher ground. And even then, getting an approximate location is not always guaranteed. We came across this campsite fairly early on in our search, but decided to hold off on exploring it further until we had finished the initial area scouring the perimeter for any real signs of life. However, after several hours of searching and not finding anyone, our dogs seemed to catch a scent trail. Bingo! This was the meal ticket we needed to find these campers. We began following the dogs in the direction they pulled us. About 600 yards down a small hill in the forest, We all got hit with this terrible odor. When I reached Carlos and the dogs, the rest of the team was already converging on the location. Rusty and the other 3 search dogs were all agitated, pulling hard against their leads and whining. Behavior I'd rarely seen from these well-trained animals. "What have we got?" I asked, slightly winded from jogging through the dense undergrowth. Carlos frowned, restraining Rusty with visible effort. Dogs picked up a strong scent trail heading northeast from the camp. All 4 of them hit on it simultaneously. "But," I prompted, sensing his hesitation. "But they're acting strange, John. Not their usual tracking behavior. More like they're afraid of something." I surveyed the area, seeing nothing immediately unusual, just the same snow-dusted forest that surrounded us for miles. "Let's follow it." Carefully, we formed a line and began tracking the scent trail, following the dog's lead. The terrain sloped gradually downward, taking us into a shallow valley I recognized from the topographical maps. According to our charts, this area consisted of loose shale and limestone deposits, not unusual for this part of the park. After about 400 yards, I noticed the first odd detail. A single hiking boot, adult-sized, lying on its side beneath a pine tree. Melissa bagged it as evidence while I photographed its position. "Matches the description of the boots the hikers were wearing," she confirmed. Another 100 yards further, we found a flashlight. Still switched on, but with batteries nearly depleted, its beam barely visible in the daylight. Then a water bottle, a hat, small personal items scattered along an increasingly clear trail through the underbrush, as though the hikers had been shedding possessions as they moved. "It's like a breadcrumb trail," muttered Ryan. "Or like they were in a hurry," Melissa countered, dropping things as they ran. "From what?" Pete asked the question no one wanted to voice. Before anyone could speculate, the wind shifted, and that's when it hit us. A stench so powerful and revolting that several team members immediately gagged or covered their faces. It was death mixed with rotting flesh. It all made us instantaneously nauseous, and judging by the fresh footprints in the snow leading up to the site, it meant that somebody was here. But nobody could survive being out here for this long, not with the storm coming. "What the hell is that?" gasped Ryan, his face pale beneath his winter tan. I'd encountered the smell of death many times in my career, from decomposing bodies lost in the wilderness to animal carcasses rotting in summer heat. This was different, more intense, wrong somehow. "Masks on," I ordered, pulling my own emergency mask from my pack. It wouldn't completely block the odor, but it might make it bearable enough to continue. The dogs were now in a state of near panic, whining and trying to pull away from the smell rather than toward it. Carlos and the other handlers had to struggle to maintain control. "Should we send the dogs back?" Carlos asked, his voice muffled through his mask. I considered our options. The dogs were our best tracking tool, but their behavior suggested we were approaching something they found deeply threatening. "Secure them here," I decided. "We'll continue on foot. 2 handlers stay with the dogs, 2 come with us." We proceeded more cautiously now, following the trampled path through the snow. The stench grew stronger with each step, becoming almost physically painful in its intensity. Even through the masks, it burned our nostrils and made our eyes water. After going a little further, we could see what appeared to be a large hole in the ground. This is exactly where the dogs were leading us to. We inspected further. The hole was roughly circular, approximately 30 feet in diameter, with edges that appeared to have collapsed inward. Fresh soil and broken limestone were scattered around the perimeter, suggesting this was a recent formation. Standing at the edge, I could see it dropped straight down for about 40 feet before opening into what looked like a larger underground space. "This isn't on any of our maps," Pete said, consulting his GPS. "Must be a new sinkhole, formed within the last week, based on the fresh edges," Melissa added, kneeling to examine the rim. "Probably triggered by those tremors we felt last Tuesday." I shone my high-powered flashlight into the darkness below. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a stone floor littered with debris from the collapse. And something else, something that made my blood run cold. "Bodies," I said quietly. "I count 5, no, 7 forms down there." The team fell silent, the only sound the whimpering of the dogs in the distance and the whistle of the wind through the trees. "We need to get down there," I said finally. "Melissa, Pete, you're with me. The rest of you, secure a perimeter and set up the retrieval equipment. Radio base camp and update them on our situation." We could tell by approaching this hole that the ground had actually caved in right here, probably from the sheer weight of snow and ice. As we approached this opening and we looked down, we found all 7 hikers. All of them had fallen to their death roughly 40 feet below. But in this weather, as cold as it was, and having them only been missing for the short amount of time, there's still no reason why that horrible odor of death and rotting flesh was as strong as it was, and we can never trace that smell. because the smell was not coming from the small cave in the ground. It was coming from all around us, like we had walked in this thick cloud that enveloped us. We rigged our rappelling gear quickly, with the efficiency that comes from years of practice. Before descending, I radioed the base camp with our coordinates and situation report. The response was broken by static, but they confirmed that additional personnel and body retrieval equipment were being dispatched to our location. "Be careful down there," the base camp operator warned. "That storm's accelerating. ETA now less than 6 hours." "Copy that," I replied. "We'll be quick." I went down first, the rope sliding through my gloved hands as I controlled my descent into the darkness. The smell grew even more intense as I dropped into the hole, a miasma that seemed to cling to my clothing and skin. At the bottom, I unclipped from the line and switched on my headlamp to supplement my flashlight. The sight that greeted me confirmed our worst fears. 7 bodies lay scattered across the stone floor, positioned as though they had fallen or been placed there. But something was immediately, disturbingly wrong. There was no blood, no visible trauma consistent with a 40-foot fall. The bodies weren't in the broken, twisted positions I would expect from impact victims. They lay almost peacefully, some on their backs, others curled on their sides as though sleeping. "Clear," I called up to Melissa and Pete, who began their own descents. While waiting for them, I conducted an initial assessment, being careful not to disturb the scene more than necessary. The victims wore hiking clothes appropriate for the weather, thermal layers, water-resistant pants, heavy jackets. Their boots were laced, their clothing intact and undamaged. I recognized them from the photos we'd reviewed: Jason, Eliza, the Rodriguez couple, Trevor, Alyssa, and Kyle. The hole opened into a larger chamber, roughly 50 feet across, with smooth limestone walls that disappeared into darkness beyond my light's reach. The ground was dry despite the snow above, and surprisingly warm compared to the freezing air at the surface. Melissa reached the bottom and immediately began documenting the scene with her camera. Pete followed moments later, his expression grim behind his mask. "This makes no sense," he said, voice hushed despite the fact that we were the only living souls present. "If the ground collapsed while they were standing on it, they should be more broken," Melissa finished bluntly. "Impact injuries. Trauma," I nodded, kneeling beside the nearest body. Alyssa, according to her features matching the photo we had. No visible injuries consistent with a fall, no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. "So they were dead before they ended up down here?" Pete suggested. "Or they didn't fall," Melissa countered. "They could have been placed here." "By whom?" Pete asked. "And why wouldn't the same person take their equipment? Their phones? Their valuables?" I moved to examine Jason's body, noting that his right hand was loosely curled around something. Carefully, using a gloved finger, I opened his stiffened fingers. Inside was a phone, presumably the missing device from camp, and a small, smooth stone with odd markings etched into its surface. The phone screen was cracked, but when I pressed the power button, it flickered to life, showing a battery at 2%. "Got a phone," I announced. "Might give us some answers." As I secured the phone in an evidence bag, Melissa called from the other side of the chamber. "John, you need to see this." I crossed to where she stood, illuminating the wall with her light. Carved or etched into the smooth limestone were symbols, dozens of them, arranged in patterns that reminded me of constellations or circuit diagrams. They seemed to have been there for years, perhaps centuries, the edges worn smooth by time. "What the hell?" Pete whispered, reaching out as if to touch them before thinking better of it. "Carvings like these have been found in other cave systems in the region," Melissa said, "usually attributed to indigenous populations from several thousand years ago." "Usually," I echoed, unconvinced. Something about the symbols seemed wrong, too precise, too mathematical for ancient carvings. As I turned to examine more of the chamber, my light caught something on Alyssa's face that I hadn't noticed before. Moving closer, I directed my beam at her cheek and felt my stomach clench. As these bodies were retrieved, they all had something very disturbing. They all had this strange mark burned into the left side of their cheek. Every single one of them. It was almost like looking at a brand of some kind. Like they had been branded. "Check the others," I ordered, my voice sharper than intended. Pete and Melissa moved quickly from body to body, confirming what I already suspected. Each victim bore the same mark, a circular pattern with lines radiating outward, like a stylized sun or star. The marks were identical in size and placement, precisely centered on the left cheek of each victim. "What could have done this?" Pete asked, his voice unsteady. "It's a burn," Melissa determined, examining Trevor's mark closely. "Second degree, I'd guess. Clean edges, consistent depth. A brand," I concluded, the word tasting foul in my mouth. They were branded, all of them, identically. The implications were horrifying. This wasn't a tragic accident. It wasn't a group of hikers stumbling into a sinkhole. This was something deliberate, something ritualistic. "We need to get them out of here," I said, my training taking over where rational thought faltered. "Document everything, then prepare for extraction. Let's move." As we worked, I tried to process what we were seeing. The bodies showed no obvious cause of death, no injuries, no signs of violence beyond the brands. They were simply dead. And the smell, that overwhelming stench of decay that seemed to permeate everything, made no sense given the condition of the bodies and the cold temperature, which should have slowed decomposition. It took nearly 2 hours to properly document the scene and prepare the bodies for extraction. By then, additional personnel had arrived at the surface, and we began the grim process of lifting each victim from their underground tomb. As the last body, Daniel Rodriguez, was secured and began its ascent, I made a final sweep of the chamber, ensuring we hadn't missed anything. My light caught a dark opening in the far wall, a passage leading deeper into the earth. Curiosity and professional thoroughness compelled me to investigate. The tunnel was narrow but navigable, descending at a gentle slope. After about 20 feet, it opened into another, smaller chamber. My light revealed more symbols carved into these walls, similar to those in the main chamber but arranged differently. And in the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, roughly waist-high, with a shallow depression carved into its top. The depression was empty, but a fine dust or residue lined it, glinting slightly in my light. I photographed it carefully from multiple angles, then took a sample using an evidence bag from my kit. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a small object half buried in the dirt floor. I crouched and carefully excavated it, a metal cylinder, approximately 6 inches long and half an inch in diameter. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and had no visible seams or markings. I bagged this as well, then made my way back to the main chamber. Melissa was waiting for me at the bottom of the rope. "Find something?" she asked, noting the additional evidence bags. "Maybe," I replied. "There's another chamber back there, more symbols, and this?" I showed her the metal cylinder. She frowned, examining it through the clear plastic. "Doesn't look like any camping gear I've seen." "Me neither. Let's get it to the lab." We were the last to ascend, emerging into a world transformed. The wind had picked up significantly during our time underground, driving needle-sharp snowflakes horizontally through the air. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees, and dark clouds boiled overhead. "Storm's coming in fast," Pete greeted us, shouting to be heard over the wind. "We need to move." The bodies had been secured in evacuation bags and were being prepared for transport. Given the deteriorating conditions, we would be using helicopter extraction rather than trying to carry them overland back to the trailhead. I checked my watch. 3:47 p.m. Daylight was already fading, and the storm would make visibility worse. The extraction point was a meadow about a mile southeast of our position, the closest suitable landing zone for the helicopters. "Move out," I ordered, and our grim procession began to make its way through the increasingly hostile forest. The journey that should have taken 30 minutes stretched to over an hour as conditions worsened. By the time we reached the meadow, visibility had dropped to less than 50 feet, and the howling wind threatened to knock us off our feet. The meadow itself was barely recognizable, already covered in several inches of fresh snow whipped into drifts by the gale. I radioed the approaching helicopters, who confirmed they could still attempt the extraction but warned it would be their last window before the storm made flying impossible. The next 40 minutes were a blur of activity as the helicopters arrived one after another, hovering just long enough to load the bodies and essential personnel before fighting their way back into the turbulent sky. The last chopper would take Melissa, Pete, and me, along with the evidence we'd collected. As we waited for its return, huddled against the driving snow, Pete voiced the question that had been hanging between us, unspoken. "What happened to those people, John?" I had no answer that made any sense. After 15 years of search and rescue, I'd seen death in almost every form the wilderness could deliver. Exposure, falls, animal attacks, drowning. But nothing like this. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we'll find out." The distant thump of rotor blades announced our ride's approach, barely audible over the screaming wind. As we prepared to board, I took one last look back toward the forest that concealed the sinkhole. Through the curtain of snow, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing at the tree line, tall, unnaturally still, watching us. I blinked, and it was gone. If it had ever been there at all. Just another trick of the storm and my overtaxed mind. But as the helicopter lifted us away from that cursed meadow, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being allowed to leave, that whatever had claimed those 7 lives had decided, for now, that it didn't want ours. And upon further inspection of their corpses, Neither of them had actually died from impact of falling. In fact, the medical examiner could not find a sign of death. It's as if they had just dropped dead. There was no outward physical signs of death or damage to the body. No fractured bones, no torn flesh, but yet none of it made sense. Somehow there was this cave in the ground that spanned roughly 30 feet in diameter and dropped to about 40 feet below in a rocky alcove. And past the alcove it dropped even deeper, so deep you could not even see because it was dark. Why were they all down here together? Did somebody dump them down here? That's how it was starting to look. The helicopter ride back to Blackwood Memorial Hospital was turbulent and tense. Melissa sat beside me, reviewing the photos on her camera, while Pete stared silently out the window at the storm-lashed landscape below. None of us spoke. The roar of the engines made conversation difficult, but more than that, I think we were all processing what we'd seen, trying to fit it into frameworks that made sense, and finding no way to do so. I clutched the evidence bags containing the phone, the strange stone, the metal cylinder, and the residue sample from the pedestal. Whatever answers existed, I hoped they might be found in these items. We landed at the hospital helipad at 6:23 p.m., by which time the storm had engulfed the entire region. The medical examiner, Dr. Eleanor Patel, met us as we disembarked, her face grave beneath the hood of her parka. "The bodies?" she asked without preamble. "Already inside," I confirmed. "All 7, she nodded once. "I've cleared my schedule. We start immediately." "I want to observe," I told her, not a request but a statement. Her eyes met mine and I saw understanding there. Like me, Dr. Patel had spent her career in this remote county, dealing with the unique challenges it presented. We'd worked together on countless cases over the years. "Of course," she said. "But clean up first. You smell like..." She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Despite our decontamination procedures before boarding the helicopter, the stench from the sinkhole still clung to us, to our clothes, our gear, our skin. After showering and changing into clean clothes from my emergency locker, I made my way to the morgue in the hospital's basement level. Melissa had volunteered to log our evidence with the county sheriff's department, and Pete had returned to the Park Service offices to file his initial report. The morgue was brightly lit and clinically cold, stainless steel and tile designed for functionality rather than comfort. Dr. Patel was already at work, her assistant helping her arrange the 7 bodies on examination tables. "John," she greeted me, looking up from her preliminary notes. "Ready to begin?" I nodded, taking a position where I could observe without interfering. Dr. Patel was methodical and thorough, starting with external examinations of each victim. She documented the strange brand marks in particular detail, photographing and measuring each one. "These were inflicted ante-mortem," she noted, examining Jason Mercer's cheek under magnification. "There's vital reaction in the surrounding tissue. I'd estimate they were made between 12 and 24 hours before death." "They're identical," I observed. "Placement, size, pattern." "Yes," she agreed, "remarkably consistent. This wasn't done by hand. Some kind of tool or device was used, something that could maintain perfect precision across multiple applications." As the examination continued, Dr. Patel's frown deepened. Each body told the same puzzling story. No external trauma beyond the brands, no signs of struggle, no indications of environmental exposure despite being found in a subterranean chamber. "Let's move to internal examination," she decided, preparing her instruments for the first autopsy. I won't detail the procedures that followed. I've witnessed many autopsies in my career, but these were different, increasingly frustrating as Dr. Patel found nothing that explained how these 7 healthy adults had died. No water in the lungs to suggest drowning. No signs of cardiac failure. No evidence of toxins, though blood samples would be sent for detailed screening. Brain and organ tissues appeared normal. No internal bleeding or trauma. It was as if they had simply stopped living. "This makes no sense," Dr. Patel muttered, 4 hours into the examination. She had just completed the autopsy on Trevor Winters, the 5th victim, with the same lack of findings. Healthy adults don't just die without cause. I had been thinking the same thing, growing more uneasy with each inconclusive result. But as she prepared to examine Alyssa Newman, something caught my attention. "Wait," I said, moving closer. "What's that on her arm?" Dr. Patel followed my gaze to a small, almost imperceptible mark on Alyssa's inner forearm. A tiny red dot, like an injection site. "Good catch," she said, adjusting her light to examine it better. "Definitely a puncture wound. Recent." She checked the other arm and found nothing, then methodically examined the rest of the body. No other punctures were visible. "Check the others," I suggested. Returning to the bodies she'd already examined, Dr. Patel found similar marks on each one. A single puncture wound on the inner forearm, So small it had been easy to overlook. Injection sites, she confirmed. All in the same location. Like the brands, too precise to be coincidental. This discovery led her to modify her approach for the final 2 autopsies. When she reached Kyle Braddock, the last victim, she spent extra time examining the puncture site on his arm, taking multiple tissue samples from the area. "There's something here," she said, her voice tight with concentration. A foreign object under the skin. Using careful dissection, she exposed what appeared to be a thin metal rod embedded in the subcutaneous tissue of Kyle's forearm, aligned with the puncture mark on the skin. Now, what I'm about to tell you kind of makes things more disturbing. One of the males of the group apparently had a long metal rod stuck into his forearm, and I don't mean when he fell. The coroner noticed something underneath the skin. Upon cutting it out, it was this long, strange, round piece of maybe roughly no more than 8 inches in length total, right in his forearm. It resembled the cylinder I'd found in the underground chamber, but smaller, perhaps 3 inches long and extremely thin, like a slender needle. Dr. Patel extracted it carefully and placed it in a specimen container. "I need to check the others again," she said, returning to the previously examined bodies with renewed purpose. One by one, she located similar objects in each victim, all in the same position in the left forearm, all the same size and apparent composition. 7 metal rods from 7 bodies. "What are they?" I asked, staring at the lined-up specimen containers. "I've never seen anything like them," Dr. Patel admitted. "They appear to be metal, but..." She picked up one container, tilting it under the light. "The texture is unusual. I'll need to run tests." When doing a further analysis on this piece of metal, it also turned out to be no known type of metal that we have here on Earth. For as small as it was, in girth and size, it was incredibly strong. It would not bend. It was in no way malleable and emitted static electricity at times. As Dr. Patel prepared the mysterious objects for analysis, I used the morgue phone to call Melissa. "Find anything on the evidence?" I asked when she answered. "The phone's battery died completely before we could extract any data," she reported. "Tech team is working on it now. The stone has those same symbols we saw in the cave. And the metal cylinder?" She paused. "John, it's not reading as any known metal on our preliminary tests. The lab's fascinated." I glanced at the specimen containers holding the rods from the victim's arms. "We found something else. Similar objects embedded in each victim's arm. Dr. Patel is about to run tests on them." "Jesus," Melissa breathed. "What the hell happened out there?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's bigger than a hiking accident. Get the sheriff involved. We need a full investigation." After hanging up, I rejoined Dr. Patel, who was preparing to run initial tests on one of the metal rods. She placed it on a small scale, then frowned at the readout. "That can't be right," she muttered, recalibrating the instrument and trying again. Same result. This thing weighs almost nothing, less than a gram, yet when she attempted to bend or break it using forceps, the rod remained perfectly rigid. Even more strangely, when she placed it near the electronic equipment, the displays flickered momentarily. "It's affecting the electrical systems," she noted, quickly moving it away. Some kind of interference. Further tests yielded equally perplexing results. The rod couldn't be scratched or marred by a scalpel. It maintained a constant temperature regardless of environmental conditions, and most disturbingly, when placed under certain light wavelengths, it seemed to emit a faint glow of its own. "I need more specialized equipment for this," Dr. Patel finally admitted, "and expertise beyond what I have. This isn't like any material I've encountered." By the time we finished, it was past midnight. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows of the morgue with its fury. Dr. Patel had compiled her preliminary findings, or lack thereof, and secured the bodies and mysterious objects for further examination. "The brands," I said as we prepared to leave. "Did you recognize the pattern?" She shook her head. "Nothing I've seen before. It resembles some astronomical symbols, perhaps, or mathematical notation, but it's not from any medical or scientific context I know." I nodded, unsurprised. Nothing about this case aligned with established patterns or explanations. "I'll have more after the toxicology reports," she promised, "and once we get the specialized analysis on those objects." I thanked her for her thoroughness and headed upstairs to find Sheriff Dalton waiting for me in the hospital lobby. Miles Dalton was a 20-year veteran of law enforcement, with the weathered face and cautious eyes that came with the job in a place like Blackwood County. "Heard you found something unusual up there," he said by way of greeting. I almost laughed at the understatement. "You could say that." Melissa briefed me on the basics. 7 dead, no obvious cause, strange marks, metal objects. He gestured toward the cafeteria. "Buy you a coffee? Sounds like we have a lot to discuss." Over bitter hospital coffee, I detailed everything we'd found, from the abandoned campsite to the sinkhole to the baffling autopsy results. Dalton listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "So we're looking at what?" he asked when I'd finished. "Murder? Some kind of cult activity?" "I don't know," I admitted. "The brands suggest ritual. The embedded objects suggest something else." I hesitated, reluctant to voice the thoughts that had been forming in my mind. "It doesn't fit any pattern I recognize." Dalton nodded slowly. "I'll open a formal investigation. First thing tomorrow. I'll send deputies to secure the scene, though with this storm, they might not be able to reach it immediately." "There's something else," I said, lowering my voice despite the empty cafeteria. "That smell at the site. It was wrong. Too strong, too pervasive for bodies that had been dead only a day or two in freezing temperatures. Could have been an animal carcass nearby," Dalton suggested. "Bear, maybe. Or multiple smaller animals." "Maybe," I agreed, not believing it. "But we found nothing else." "Well, whatever happened, we'll figure it out," Dalton said with more confidence than I felt. "We always do." But as I drove home through the howling storm at 2 a.m., I wasn't so sure. This felt different from anything we'd encountered before. The strange symbols, the inexplicable deaths, the alien objects embedded in human flesh. It all pointed to something beyond our usual framework of understanding. And that smell, that horrible, all-encompassing stench of death that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere, continued to haunt me, clinging to my memory as it had clung to my clothes. Caroline was asleep when I arrived home, having left a note on the kitchen counter. "Found them." I wrote a simple yes beneath it, unable to explain more on paper, unsure if I could explain it at all. As I showered again, trying to wash away the lingering psychological residue of the day, I found myself staring at my own forearm, half expecting to see a telltale puncture mark appearing on my skin. These things about the body are things that I did not myself see personally, but things I was told through friends and the coroner himself. A huge investigation was conducted, by not just on these hikers but the entire surrounding area, and nothing could be found. No trace of these hikers' disappearances. No trace of their deaths or murder. No trace of a murderer, and no trace of this putrid death smell that still lingered in the area once these bodies were long gone. In fact, the smell only seemed to extend and reach further out, lasting up to 4 weeks after this happened, before just one day suddenly disappeared. The storm raged for 3 days, dropping over 4 feet of snow on Blackwood National Park and the surrounding county. Roads were impassable, power lines down, and communications spotty at best. I spent the time compiling my official report, though I found myself struggling with how to document aspects of the case that defied conventional explanation. When the weather finally cleared enough for emergency vehicles to move freely, Sheriff Dalton assembled a task force to investigate the deaths. I was included as the SAR coordinator, along with Melissa, Dr. Patel, 2 county detectives, a forensic specialist, and a representative from the FBI field office in the state capitol. Our first meeting took place at the sheriff's department, a windowless conference room filled with maps, photographs, and preliminary reports. Agent Rebecca Larson from the FBI sat quietly in the corner, observing more than participating as Sheriff Dalton outlined what we knew. 7 victims identified as Jason Mercer, Eliza Carpenter, Daniel and Sophia Rodriguez, Trevor Winters, Alyssa Newman, and Kyle Braddock. Found in an unmapped sinkhole approximately 7 miles from the east entrance of Blackwood National Park. He pointed to the location on the topographical map pinned to the wall. "No obvious cause of death," Dr. Patel continued. "Toxicology reports came back negative for common substances. No environmental causes like carbon monoxide or methane exposure. No signs of violence or struggle beyond the identical brand marks found on each victim's left cheek." She displayed photographs of the brands, clinical, close-up images that somehow looked more disturbing in the harsh fluorescent light of the conference room than they had in the morgue. "And these objects?" Agent Larson spoke for the first time, gesturing to the images of the metal rods. "Still being analyzed," Dr. Patel replied. "Initial tests are inconclusive. They appear to be some kind of metal alloy, but it doesn't match any known composition in our databases." "What about the markings in the cave?" Detective Harding asked. "Any progress identifying those?" Melissa took this question. "We've consulted with anthropologists and archaeologists from the state university. They confirm similar symbols have been found in other cave systems in the region, but there's disagreement about their origin and meaning. Some attribute them to indigenous populations from 3,000, 5,000 years ago. Others suggest they may be more recent." "And the stone found in the victim's hand?" Sheriff Dalton prompted. "Same symbols," Melissa confirmed. "Lab confirms it's local limestone, likely from the cave itself." "What about the phone?" I asked. Any data recovered? Detective Harding nodded. Tech team managed to extract the contents. Last text message was sent 3 days before the bodies were discovered, matching what we already knew. But there was something else. A video recorded approximately 12 hours before estimated time of death. He moved to the laptop connected to the room's projector and pulled up a file. Warning. This is disturbing. The video began playing on the wall screen. It showed a shaky, handheld shot of what appeared to be the inside of a tent, illuminated by a flashlight. Jason Mercer's voice came through, breathless and excited. Day 3 at Blackwood. We found something incredible yesterday. Some kind of underground chamber that's not on any of the park maps. Eliza thinks it might be part of the limestone cave system that runs through this region, but if so, it's completely unmapped. The camera turned to show Eliza, who was examining something small in her hands. The stone with the strange symbols. These markings are everywhere down there, Jason continued, panning to show similar stones they had apparently collected. We're going back today for a more thorough exploration. Trevor rigged up some proper climbing gear so we can descend safely. The video cut abruptly, then resumed, showing what was clearly the interior of the cave we had found. The 7 hikers were visible, their headlamps creating crisscrossing beams in the darkness. They looked excited, not afraid. This chamber extends further than we thought, Jason's voice narrated as he panned around. There's some kind of tunnel system beyond that narrow passage. We're going to check it out. The camera followed as the group moved through the tunnel I had discovered during our recovery operation, emerging into the smaller chamber with the pedestal. Look at this, Alyssa called, her voice echoing slightly. Some kind of altar? The camera zoomed in on the pedestal, showing that the depression on top contained what appeared to be a metallic object. The cylinder I had found half buried in the dirt. Don't touch it, Daniel cautioned, but Trevor was already reaching for it. It's warm, Trevor said, surprise evident in his voice as he lifted the cylinder. And light, like it's hollow. As he held it up, the cylinder seemed to catch the light strangely, reflecting it in patterns that matched the symbols on the walls. For a brief moment, the camera captured all 7 hikers standing around the pedestal, their faces illuminated by this unusual reflection. Then the video abruptly cut to static for several seconds before resuming with a much darker, shakier shot. Jason appeared to be running, his breathing heavy and panicked. The camera caught glimpses of trees, snow, darkness. Something's following us, he gasped. Ever since we left the cave. We can't see it, but it's there. The others. He broke off, turning the camera to show the other 6 hikers stumbling through the forest behind him. They all looked disoriented, confused. We need to go back, Eliza was saying, her voice oddly flat. We need to return it. No, Jason responded. Something's wrong. Something's happening to all of you. We need to get help. The camera swung wildly as Jason apparently stumbled, then steadied on a shot of the night sky between tree branches. A strange light moved across the frame, not the moon, not an aircraft, but something that seemed to pulse and shift in ways that defied normal movement patterns. Jason's voice came again, now a whisper. What is that? What is? The video ended abruptly. Silence filled the conference room as the screen went dark. No one spoke for several long moments. What the hell did we just watch? Detective Harding finally asked. Clearly they found something in that cave, Sheriff Dalton said, his voice carefully neutral. Something that may have led to their deaths. The timestamp on this video places it at approximately 11:30 p.m., 2 nights before we found the bodies, Detective Harding noted. Their estimated time of death is around noon the following day, according to Dr. Patel's assessment. So they survived the night after this recording, I said, trying to construct a timeline. But something happened the next day. We need to get back to that site, Sheriff Dalton decided. Full forensic team. Document everything in that cave system. The weather's still difficult up there, I cautioned, but passable with proper equipment. I'll coordinate with our evidence response team, Agent Larson said, speaking up again. This falls within federal jurisdiction as it occurred in a national park. Planning for the site investigation took another day, during which additional analyses were conducted on the metal rods extracted from the victims. Dr. Patel forwarded the preliminary results to our task force via email. The objects removed from the victims' forearms defy conventional material analysis. They are composed of an unidentified metallic alloy that exhibits several anomalous properties. 1. Extreme lightweight yet exceptional structural integrity. 2. Resistance to all attempted deformation or damage. 3. Slight electromagnetic emission. 4. No radioactivity detected, but unusual energy signature present. I've sent samples to the FBI laboratory for more advanced testing. In my 22 years of forensic pathology, I have never encountered any material with these properties. The return expedition to the sinkhole was scheduled for the following day. Our team consisted of Sheriff Dalton, Detective Harding, Agent Larson, Melissa, myself, and 4 FBI evidence specialists. The journey was arduous, with deep snow and fallen trees blocking much of the trail, but we reached the site by early afternoon. The sinkhole remained as we had left it, the edges now crusted with ice and snow. But something had changed. The smell, that horrible stench of decay that had nearly overwhelmed us during the recovery operation, was stronger than before. "What is that?" Agent Larson asked, grimacing behind her mask. "That's what we've been trying to figure out," I replied. "It was present when we found the bodies, but it's intensified since then." "Despite the bodies being removed," Melissa added, "and despite the freezing temperatures which should suppress decomposition odors, we set up a pulley system and began our descent into the sinkhole. The main chamber appeared unchanged, though our powerful lights revealed details I had missed during the recovery operation. Additional symbols carved into the higher portions of the walls, and what looked like a fine dark residue on the stone floor. "Take samples of everything," Agent Larson instructed her team. "Every surface, every substance." We proceeded to the smaller chamber with the pedestal, which I had only briefly examined during our previous visit. In daylight filtered down through the sinkhole entrance, the space revealed new details. The symbols on the walls were arranged in concentric circles, radiating outward from the pedestal at the center. "These aren't random," Detective Harding observed, photographing the patterns. "There's a deliberate design here. Look at this," called one of the evidence technicians who had been examining the pedestal. "There's some kind of mechanism built into it." Upon closer inspection, the seemingly solid stone pedestal contained a series of moving parts, rings that could be rotated to align different symbols, similar to a combination lock. The depression on top, where the metal cylinder had been found, appeared to be just one component of a more complex structure. "This isn't ancient indigenous art," Melissa said, her voice hushed with realization. "This is technology." As the evidence team continued their documentation and collection, Sheriff Dalton, Agent Larson, and I explored further, discovering that the tunnel system extended deeper than I had initially realized. Beyond the pedestal chamber, a narrow passage descended at a steep angle, eventually opening into a much larger cavern. This space was different, clearly natural rather than constructed, with stalactites hanging from the ceiling and a small underground stream running along one wall. But even here, the strange symbols appeared, carved into the natural rock formations and patterns that seemed to follow the water's flow. "How far does this go?" Sheriff Dalton wondered, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Unknown," Agent Larson replied, consulting a handheld device. "But we're already nearly 200 feet below the surface." We decided not to proceed further without proper caving equipment and additional personnel. As we made our way back to the main chamber, I noticed something that had escaped my attention before. Small, almost imperceptible holes drilled into the walls at regular intervals, each about the diameter of a pencil. "These weren't made by natural processes," I pointed out to Agent Larson. "They're too precise, too uniform." She examined one closely with a penlight. "They appear to form some kind of grid pattern throughout the chamber. Almost like sensors," I finished, the realization dawning. "Or emitters." By the time we completed our investigation and returned to the surface, night was falling. The evidence team had collected dozens of samples and hundreds of photographs. Agent Larson had been in regular communication with her superiors, her expression growing increasingly grave with each conversation. As we prepared to depart, she pulled me aside. "Mitchell, what we found down there, it doesn't align with any known cultural artifacts or natural formations. My office is classifying this investigation effective immediately." "Classifying?" I echoed, disbelieving. "These are 7 dead civilians. Their families deserve answers, and they'll get them," she assured me, though her tone lacked conviction. "But through proper channels, after we've determined exactly what we're dealing with here." I wanted to argue further but was interrupted by a call from Melissa, who had been monitoring the perimeter of the site. "John, you need to see this." I followed her voice to the edge of the clearing, where she stood staring at the snow-covered ground. In the fading daylight, I could see what had alarmed her. A set of tracks leading away from the sinkhole into the dense forest, but they weren't human tracks. They weren't animal tracks either, at least not from any species I recognized. The impressions were oddly shaped, with 3 pointed extensions like toes, but larger than any known predator in the region. And they appeared to have been made recently, the edges still sharp in the crusty snow. "What made these?" Sheriff Dalton asked, crouching to examine them. No one had an answer. As we followed the tracks to the tree line, they simply stopped, not gradually fading, but ending abruptly as though whatever had made them had suddenly vanished or been lifted away. Keep in mind this place is covered in at least 2-3 feet of snow. Temperatures are often dropping down at 10 degrees at night. And yet this rotting flesh putrid death smell was as pungent as ever. It was like being trapped in the back of a van or so with dead rotting animals in the summertime in 100-degree heat. The odor was that strong. Our return to Blackwood was subdued, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what we had discovered. The next morning I arrived at the sheriff's office to find an unfamiliar black SUV parked outside, and two men in dark suits speaking with Sheriff Dalton in his private office. Melissa intercepted me in the hallway. "Something's happening," she said in a low voice. "Agent Larson has been recalled to Washington. These new guys arrived an hour ago. They're not FBI. They won't say which agency they're with." Before I could respond, Sheriff Dalton's door opened, and he beckoned me inside. The two men regarded me with polite but evaluating expressions. "John Mitchell," one of them said, not offering his hand. "I understand you led the recovery operation at the Blackwood sinkhole." "That's right," I confirmed, looking to Sheriff Dalton for explanation. "These gentlemen are from a federal task force," Dalton said, his expression carefully neutral. "They're taking over the investigation." "What task force?" I asked. "This is a local matter. 7 dead hikers. It's a matter of national security now," the second man interrupted smoothly. "We'll need all your reports, all evidence collected, and detailed statements from everyone involved in the recovery and subsequent investigation." Over the next 2 days, I was interviewed extensively about every aspect of the case, as were Melissa, Dr. Patel, and everyone else connected to it. The strange metal objects, the stone with symbols, the samples from the cave, all were confiscated and transported to an undisclosed location. A week after their arrival, the men departed as suddenly as they had appeared. Sheriff Dalton called me into his office again, his expression troubled. "The case is closed, John," he said without preamble. "Closed?" I echoed in disbelief. "How can it be closed? We don't even know what happened to those people." "Official cause of death has been determined as environmental exposure and accidental fall," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "The families have been notified. The bodies are being released for burial." "That's bullshit, Miles, and you know it," I said, anger rising. "Those people didn't die from exposure or a fall. What about the brands, the metal objects in their arms, the video?" Dalton sighed heavily. "There is no video, John. There are no metal objects. The marks on their faces have been attributed to contact with mineral deposits in the cave. The case is closed." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. "They're covering it up. Why? I don't know," he admitted quietly. "But I do know that pushing this further will cost us our jobs at minimum. Maybe worse. Whatever those hikers found, someone very powerful wants it kept quiet." I left his office in a daze, unable to reconcile the official conclusion with what I had seen with my own eyes. That night, I returned home to find Caroline waiting for me, concern etched on her face. "Someone came by the house today," she said. "2 men in suits. They asked about your involvement in the Blackwood case. They were insistent." A chill ran through me. "What did you tell them?" "Only what you've told me." "Which isn't much," she replied. "John, what's going on? What did you find out there?" I looked at my wife of 12 years, the person I trusted most in the world, and found myself unable to answer truthfully. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I couldn't make sense of it myself, and because I was afraid of what knowing might mean for her. "It's over," I said instead. "Case closed. Accidental deaths." She knew I was withholding something but didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Are you in danger?" "No," I answered, hoping it was true. "But I think it's best if I don't discuss the details, even with you. For now." In the days that followed, life gradually returned to normal. The strange deaths at Blackwood became local legend, whispered about but officially explained away. The sinkhole was filled in, the area declared hazardous and off-limits due to geological instability, and yet, for weeks afterward, hikers and park rangers reported the same horrible smell permeating the forest around the former site, a stench of decay that seemed to grow stronger rather than dissipate with time. Then, exactly 4 weeks after we had discovered the bodies, the smell vanished, not gradually fading but disappearing completely overnight, as though it had never existed at all. While I can only myself speculate on all the things it could be, I could tell you what it definitely is not. I do not believe that these hikers were murdered in any way. I believe that after everything I know, something else much darker happened to them. Were they abducted? I don't know. I can't say that, but something took them from their campsite, 650 meters up from this spot, and placed them down in this hole in the earth, 40 feet down, where they were all dead. 3 months passed. Spring came to Blackwood County, melting the deep snowdrifts and bringing new life to the forests. On the surface, everything had returned to normal. I continued my work with search and rescue, responding to the usual calls: lost hikers, injured climbers, the occasional stranded motorist. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, I remained haunted by what we had found in that sinkhole. Sleep became elusive, interrupted by nightmares of dark chambers and strange symbols. I found myself obsessively researching obscure archaeological findings, unexplained disappearances in national parks, and scientific anomalies. Caroline noticed, of course. How could she not? But she respected my silence on the matter, supporting me in other ways, making sure I ate properly, encouraging me to spend time outdoors when I wasn't working, gently steering conversations away from anything related to Blackwood National Park when others brought it up. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered to our mailbox without postage or return address. My name was written on the envelope in neat, precise handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing an address in the neighboring county and a date and time. Thursday, 8 p.m. Nothing else. No signature, no explanation. I should have reported it to Sheriff Dalton. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I tucked it into my pocket and told no one. Thursday evening found me driving alone to the specified address, which turned out to be a small roadside diner about 40 miles from Blackwood. The place was nearly empty when I arrived. Just an elderly couple in one booth and a solitary figure in the farthest corner, face obscured by a newspaper. I ordered coffee from the disinterested waitress and waited, unsure what to expect. After a few minutes, the newspaper lowered, revealing a face I recognized immediately. Dr. Eleanor Patel. She gestured for me to join her, which I did, sliding into the booth across from her. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why all the secrecy?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Because what I'm about to tell you could cost us both more than our jobs," she replied. Her usually composed face showed signs of the same strain I'd been feeling. Dark circles under her eyes, new lines around her mouth. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small, sealed container, which she placed on the table between us. Through the clear plastic, I could see a familiar metallic object, one of the rods we had extracted from the hiker's arms. "How did you?" I began. "I kept one," she interrupted, "before they confiscated everything. I couldn't just let it go, not without answers." I stared at the object, feeling a mixture of dread and vindication. "So they do exist. The official report is a lie," she finished. "A fabrication. Those hikers didn't die from exposure or a fall. They didn't even die from anything I can identify in my extensive medical career." She leaned forward. "I've spent the last 3 months analyzing this thing in private, using equipment borrowed from colleagues under false pretenses. And John, it's not from here." "The park?" I asked, though I already suspected what she meant. "Earth," she clarified. "The metallurgical composition includes elements that don't exist on the periodic table. The internal structure defies known physics, and it emits a frequency that can't be detected by standard equipment. I only found it by accident using an experimental scanner developed by a friend at the university." I felt cold despite the diner's warmth. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying that whatever those hikers encountered in that cave wasn't human technology. It wasn't ancient indigenous artifacts. It was something else entirely." We sat in silence for a moment, the implications hanging between us. "There's more," Dr. Patel continued eventually. "I managed to access some of the brain tissue samples I took from the victims before they were confiscated. They showed cellular changes I've never seen before, neural pathways altered in ways that shouldn't be possible without major physical trauma, yet there was no such trauma present." "What kind of alterations?" I asked. "It's as if their brains were rewired somehow. Specific regions related to perception, memory, and consciousness showed microscopic changes consistent with some kind of targeted modification." "By the objects in their arms?" She nodded. "That would be my hypothesis. The metal rods seemed designed to interface with the human nervous system. They were positioned precisely along major nerve pathways in the forearm that connect directly to the brain." My mind flashed back to the video we had seen, the hiker's strange behavior after discovering the metal cylinder in the cave, Eliza's flat voice saying they needed to return it. "They were being controlled," I said, the realization crystallizing. Something was influencing them through these devices, or communicating with them, Dr. Patel suggested, or studying them. We can only speculate on the purpose. "What about the brands, the symbols?" "I believe they're connected to the frequency these devices emit. Possibly some kind of marking system. Identification, perhaps." I took a sip of my now cold coffee, trying to process everything. "Why are you telling me this now? Why the secrecy?" Dr. Patel's expression darkened. "Because 2 weeks ago, I received a visit from the same men who took over our investigation. They knew I had kept a sample. They threatened my career, My family. She paused, and then they offered me a job, studying similar materials at a classified facility. What did you tell them? I said I needed time to consider. But the truth is, I'm afraid, John, not just of them but of what this means. If these objects are what I think they are, then something non-human is operating in our backyard. Something with technology far beyond our understanding. Something that can kill without leaving a trace. And the government knows, I added. They're covering it up. She nodded. Which means it's happened before. The question is, how many times? And why Blackwood? We talked for another hour, sharing theories and observations that we'd both been afraid to voice to anyone else. Dr. Patel had done extensive research into similar cases across the country. Hikers and campers found dead under mysterious circumstances, often in remote wilderness areas, often without clear cause of death. There's a pattern, she explained. Most incidents occur in or near national parks. Most involve groups rather than individuals, and most have some geographical feature in common. Caves, sinkholes, unusual rock formations, like the cave system under Blackwood, I noted. Exactly. I think these entities, whatever they are, have been here a long time. The symbols we found may have been warnings left by indigenous peoples who encountered them centuries ago. As our conversation wound down, Dr. Patel carefully returned the metal rod to her bag. I'm leaving town tomorrow. I've accepted a position at a hospital in Arizona, as far from Blackwood as I could manage. You're running, I observed, not judgmentally. Yes, she admitted without shame. I have children, John. I can't risk their safety by pursuing this further. But I couldn't leave without telling someone else what I'd learned. Someone who saw what I saw. What should I do with this information? I asked. She considered the question carefully. That's for you to decide. But be careful. These people, whoever they are, they're watching. They've invested considerable resources in keeping this quiet. We parted ways in the parking lot, Dr. Patel heading west while I returned home, my mind spinning with revelations and questions. I told Caroline I'd been working late, hating the lie but unable to burden her with the truth. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't run like Dr. Patel, but I wouldn't recklessly pursue the truth either. I would watch, wait, and document. If something was happening in Blackwood, something beyond human understanding, then evidence would eventually surface again. And when it did, I would be ready. In the months that followed, I compiled a private record of everything related to the case. My memories, observations, conversations with Dr. Patel, and research into similar incidents across the country. I kept this record secure, separate from my home and work, telling no one of its existence. Life continued. Seasons changed. Blackwood National Park received its usual flow of visitors, none aware of what had happened in that remote section now marked as closed due to environmental hazards. Oh, and I should also mention that their time of death all seemed to be about the same time. What everything pointed to was that they were somehow taken or they disappeared. They were branded. Judging by the evidence, I'm assuming they were all killed somehow and placed together in this hole in the earth. A year after finding those 7 bodies, I was called to a new search and rescue operation. 3 hikers missing in the western quadrant of the park, an area miles from the previous incident. We found their campsite undisturbed, equipment intact, no signs of struggle or wildlife interference. And as we expanded our search perimeter, the dogs began behaving strangely, pulling toward an area not marked on our maps, an area where a familiar, putrid smell hung in the still forest air. History, it seemed, was repeating itself. But this time, I knew what we might be dealing with. This time, I was prepared to document everything, to preserve evidence before it could be confiscated or explained away. Because whatever was happening in Blackwood National Park, whatever had killed those 7 hikers and branded them with alien symbols and implanted foreign objects in their flesh, it wasn't finished. It was just waiting, watching, perhaps learning from each encounter. It's stories like these that really rattle your brain at night, because a lot of times you'll have very normal search and rescue missions. People disappear, you find them, everything is okay. Or you don't find them and everything is not okay. But oftentimes, search and rescue missions happen where you don't find or do find somebody, and there are some very disturbing attributes to their entire disappearance. I don't know what we're dealing with in those woods. I don't know if it's something that evolved alongside us, undetected for centuries, or something that came from elsewhere. I don't know if the government is actively collaborating with it or merely covering up its existence to prevent panic. What I do know is this: 7 people died in Blackwood National Park after encountering something beyond human understanding. Their deaths were covered up by forces with the power to rewrite reality on paper, to make evidence disappear, to threaten and coerce those who knew the truth. And it will happen again, perhaps in Blackwood, perhaps elsewhere. The patterns are there if you know how to look for them. The missing hikers, the inexplicable deaths, the strange phenomena reported briefly before being dismissed or rationalized away. So I continue my work with search and rescue, helping those I can, and watching for signs of something beyond our comprehension operating in the wilderness we falsely believe we've tamed. I maintain my records, adding to them whenever I find new information or connections, and I wonder, sometimes, if I'm being watched in return. If the strange metal devices that killed those hikers might one day find their way under my own skin, sending signals to whatever intelligence designed them. In the dark of night, when sleep eludes me, I sometimes find myself touching my left cheek, half expecting to feel the raised pattern of a brand I cannot see, and I listen for sounds that shouldn't exist, smell for odors that have no natural source, and wait for the day when the truth can no longer be buried in a filled-in sinkhole in the remote wilderness of Blackwood National Park. Or when I look in the mirror, I'll see the mark on my own face and know that I'm already part of whatever happened to those 7 hikers, that I have been, perhaps, since the moment I descended into that hole in the earth and breathed in the inexplicable stench of death that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Look, I'll be honest with you. I wish I myself had more answers, and clearly I don't. That's kind of why I'm sharing this story with you, in hopes that maybe you can kind of bounce me back some speculations and maybe some theories about what you think could have happened. I know you're not necessarily a guru, but surely you've read enough and researched enough that there has to be some sort of explanation. I mean, I don't know what else to think. If my mind goes the whole alien UFO route, I feel crazy. But if my mind goes the route of a murderer or some sort of occultic rituals, I think of the logistics and the practicality of how all this took place, and how none of this makes sense or even seems probable. The truth is out there in those woods, buried beneath layers of official denial and classification, and one day, I intend to find it, before it finds me. I've been reading these stories for a while now, and I thought it was about time that I would finally share mine. What happened to me isn't something I've spoken about, not to colleagues, not to supervisors, not even to my closest friends, but I need to tell someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet. Maybe then I can finally put it behind me. It all began 5 years ago when I was just starting out as a rookie ranger for the state of West Virginia. Fresh out of training, eager to make my mark, convinced I understood the wilderness. I was 26, with a degree in environmental science and a lifetime of camping trips that I mistakenly believed had prepared me for anything the Appalachian wilderness could throw at me. My supervisor, Jim Harkins, a weathered man with 30 years of experience etched into the lines of his face, had tried to temper my enthusiasm with caution. "The mountains have secrets, kid," he told me during my first week. "Things that don't make it into the training manuals. You respect that, and you'll be fine." I nodded and smiled, dismissing his words as the typical old-timer trying to spook the newcomer. If only I'd listened. My assigned patrol area was the northeastern section of Monongahela National Forest, a sprawling wilderness of dense woodlands, rugged terrain, and hidden valleys. I'd spend my days hiking the trails, checking campgrounds, and ensuring visitors followed regulations. Most days were uneventful, picking up litter, giving directions to lost hikers, occasionally dealing with a campfire that hadn't been properly extinguished. The day it happened began like any other. Early April, the forest caught in that in-between stage where winter reluctantly loosens its grip while spring struggles to take hold. The morning air carried a biting chill, but the forecast promised temperatures in the mid-60s by afternoon. Perfect hiking weather. I reported to the ranger station at 7 a.m., checked the logs from the night shift, and loaded my backpack with the usual supplies. First aid kit, radio, GPS, binoculars, water, food, and the other tools of the trade. Jim was off that day, so I checked in with Ranger Davies, who barely looked up from his computer when I announced my patrol route. "Stick to the schedule," was all he said. "We've got school groups coming through the main trails later." I nodded, though I already had other plans. There was a section of backcountry trail I'd been meaning to explore, an area marked on our maps but rarely visited by tourists. It wasn't technically off-limits for solo patrols, but it wasn't encouraged either. Still, I was feeling restless, eager to see more than the same well-worn paths. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I checked in by radio at the scheduled times, inspected a couple of backcountry campsites, both unoccupied, and documented some trail erosion that would need attention. By noon, I'd reached the junction where I needed to make a decision: continue on the standard patrol route or veer onto the lesser-traveled path I'd been eyeing. I stood at the trail marker, staring down the narrow, overgrown path that disappeared into the thick forest. Something about it called to me, a pull I couldn't explain. I glanced at my watch, did some quick mental calculations, and Decided I could explore for a couple of hours and still make it back to the ranger station by the end of my shift. The trail was more challenging than I'd anticipated. Fallen trees blocked the path in several places, forcing me to climb over or find a way around. The forest grew denser, the canopy overhead blocking much of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight on the forest floor. I carefully marked my path on my GPS, making notes of landmarks. The last thing I needed was to get lost on my unauthorized detour. Around 2 p.m. I stopped for lunch beside a small stream, sitting on a moss-covered boulder as I ate my sandwich. The forest was quiet, too quiet, I realized. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just the gentle gurgle of the stream and my own breathing. That should have been my first warning. In all my training, in all the wilderness guides I'd studied, one consistent warning stood out. When the forest goes silent, something is wrong. Predators are near. Danger is present. But I dismissed it, attributing the silence to my own presence disturbing the wildlife. It was as I was packing up to continue that I first heard it, a sound that stopped me cold. A scream, distant but distinct, echoing through the trees. Not quite human, not quite animal, but somewhere horrifyingly in between. I had been running the trails by myself this day and heard something that sounded like screaming coming from up ahead. Being the good little ranger that I am, I decided to investigate things. As I got closer, the sound intensified, but there were no words being spoken, almost as if whatever was making the noise was trying to draw me closer. I hesitated, my hand moving to the radio at my belt. Protocol said I should report unusual sounds or signs of distress, but what would I say? That I heard a weird scream while exploring an area I wasn't supposed to be in. Besides, it was probably just a fox or a bobcat. Mountain lions were rare in these parts, but not unheard of, and they could make sounds unnervingly similar to human screams. I decided to investigate first, report later if necessary. Following the sound, I moved deeper into the forest away from the trail. The terrain grew steeper, rockier. I had to use my hands in places, half climbing as the ground rose sharply. The screaming continued, intermittent now, but growing louder. It sounded distressed, pained, and despite my misgivings, I couldn't ignore what might be an animal or person in trouble. The light was starting to fade when I reached the edge of a small clearing bordered on one side by a rocky cliff face about 30 feet high. And there, at the base of the cliff, was a sight that would forever change my understanding of the world. So I'm following this screaming because it kind of sounds like a mountain lion, but it sounds very humanistic, like somebody had genuinely needed help. So after following it for a short while, I come to this small cliff section where I am seeing a mountain lion. Actually, the source of this noise is going absolutely crazy right next to its den. I crouched behind a fallen tree, observing from about 60 feet away. The mountain lion, a large female, tawny coat dulled by the fading light, was pacing frantically before what appeared to be a cave entrance at the base of the cliff. Her movements were erratic, panicked. She would approach the entrance, then back away suddenly, tail lashing, before letting out another of those bone-chilling screams that had drawn me here. I'm watching this in awe, because this mountain lion is clearly distressed about something and she's going crazy, screaming and making all sorts of noise. Remember, I was a real bad rookie at this point. I didn't know much about animals, and this was really my first run-in with even mountain lions screaming. Which, by the way, if you've never heard, you can Google. It does sound a lot like a human screaming. Anyway, I remained perfectly still, barely breathing. My training had covered mountain lion encounters, but always with the emphasis on avoiding them in the first place. They were solitary creatures, not typically aggressive toward humans unless provoked or protecting young. This one, however, seemed focused entirely on something inside that cave. In my years since, I've seen all manner of wildlife behavior, territorial disputes, mating rituals, hunting tactics, but nothing like what I witnessed next. This mountain lion began screaming and yelling, or making the roaring sounds like it was screaming, and then slowly started backing away from the den entrance. And you could start to hear the heavy sounds of something big coming out towards the den. Instinctually, I was thinking, let me guess, a bear had somehow taken residence or curiosity in this mountain lion's den, and now the two were fighting. But before that thought could even finish going all the way through my brain, the sound from within the cave grew louder, a shuffling, dragging sound accompanied by deep, guttural breathing. Something large was moving toward the entrance. My first thought was a bear, as black bears were common in these mountains. A confrontation between a mountain lion and a bear would be rare, potentially deadly for both animals, but not beyond the realm of possibility. I reached slowly for my pack, where my camera was stored. Whatever was about to emerge, it would be valuable to document it. My fingers had just closed around the camera when the creature appeared. This hulking, hairy figure steps out into the entrance of the den, reaches down in one motion, picks up the mountain lion. The mountain lion fights back, but this thing is not even fazed. It grabs the mountain lion's head, twists it like it's nothing, completely breaking the neck, and then throwing the body very hard up against a massive fir tree nearby, and you can hear its spine crack from the 60 feet away that I was watching this thing. Time seemed to freeze. My breath caught in my throat, my heart hammering against my ribs so violently I feared it might give away my position. The creature, for I had no other word to describe it, stood at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark matted fur. Its proportions were humanoid, but wrong somehow. Arms too long, shoulders too broad, head set directly on those massive shoulders with barely any neck visible. In the fading light, I couldn't make out details of its face, and for that small mercy, I remained grateful. What I could see was enough to haunt my nightmares for years to come. The raw primal strength it had displayed in dispatching a 130-pound apex predator, as if it were nothing more than a troublesome insect, told me everything I needed to know about my chances should it discover my presence, and then the body slumped down. This thing, staring at the body, let out a frustrated grunt and flared its nostrils, kind of all huffy and puffy, and then walked back into the den. My jaw was literally on the ground and I was pale. I had never been so scared in my life. I picked up my jaw and I ran as fast as I could. I ran. No thought, no plan, just blind, animal panic driving me through the darkening forest. Branches whipped my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. The image of that creature, the sound of the mountain lion's spine shattering against the tree, played on repeat in my mind. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning. At some point I stumbled, went down hard on one knee, and the sharp pain finally broke through my panic. I stopped, gasping for breath, and realized I had no idea where I was. In my blind flight, I'd lost all sense of direction. Night had fallen completely now. The forest around me pitch black except for the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. With shaking hands, I pulled out my flashlight and GPS. The screen showed me far off any marked trail, but at least I had a general idea of which direction to head to reach the nearest road. I listened intently for any sound of pursuit, but heard nothing beyond my own ragged breathing and the resumed chorus of night insects, a small comfort, as their song suggested no large predator was nearby. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could through the darkness, checking the GPS frequently to maintain my course. Every shadow seemed to shift and move, every sound amplified by my fear. I kept imagining hot breath on the back of my neck, massive hands reaching for me from the darkness. After what felt like hours, I spotted the welcome gleam of metal through the trees. My truck, parked where I'd left it at the trailhead. I broke into a final sprint, fumbling with my keys as I reached the vehicle, and practically threw myself inside, locking the doors immediately. And when I got back to my truck, I didn't know exactly who to call or what to say. I had never seen anything like this before, and even to this day I speculate what it was that even was. What did I see and what did I stumble upon? I felt like my heart was about to beat out of its chest. Sitting there in the dark, engine running, heater blasting to combat the chill that seemed to have settled into my very bones, I tried to process what I'd witnessed. My ranger training had covered wildlife encounters of all kinds, bears, cougars, wolves, even moose, but nothing like this. Nothing that could explain a bipedal, 8-foot-tall creature with the strength to kill a mountain lion with its bare hands. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations. A bear standing on its hind legs? No, the proportions were all wrong, and no bear moved like that. A man in some kind of costume? Ridiculous. No human could have managed that feat of strength, and why would anyone be out here in such a remote area, in such a convincing disguise, which left me with explanations I wasn't prepared to accept. Bigfoot. Sasquatch, the wild man. Stories I'd dismissed as campfire tales and local legends. I reached for my radio, then hesitated, hand hovering over the call button. What would I say? Who would believe me? I'd be laughed out of the ranger service, possibly subjected to drug testing or psychological evaluation. And all this after I'd violated protocol by going off on my own, unauthorized exploration. I put the radio down. I needed time to think, to process, to decide what, if anything, I was going to tell my superiors. I put the truck in gear and drove slowly back toward the ranger station, my mind racing faster than the vehicle ever could. I will say this, though, that out of all the years I've done this, that was the only thing that sticks out to me as completely out of the ordinary. Because after this, I've never actually told another soul about this. You're the first one. Congratulations. I was too scared and always have been too scared to tell any of my fellow rangers or even my bosses. I didn't want to lose my job or get called crazy or made fun of. But perhaps these sorts of things are much more common than I realize. The next morning I reported to work as usual. I'd spent a restless night in my small cabin, jumping at every sound, checking and rechecking that the doors and windows were locked. When I finally did sleep, my dreams were filled with dark shapes and screaming cougars. Jim was back on duty, nursing a cup of coffee at his desk when I walked in. He looked up, his weathered face creasing into a frown as he took in my appearance. "Jesus, kid, you look like hell." I managed a weak smile. "Rough night. Didn't sleep well." He studied me for a moment longer. "Anything I should know about?" This was my chance. I could tell him everything, unburden myself of this terrible knowledge, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I shook my head. "Just some bad dreams. I'm fine." Jim didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. "Well, you're on visitor center duty today. Try not to scare the tourists with that zombie look." The day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, answering questions, handing out maps, explaining trail conditions, all while feeling utterly disconnected from the normal world around me. How could everything just continue as if nothing had happened? As if the foundations of reality hadn't shifted beneath my feet? During my lunch break, I found myself in front of the ranger station's small library, a collection of field guides, local history books, and wildlife management resources. Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, I pulled out a book I'd always ignored before, Appalachian Folklore and Legends. I flipped through it quickly, stopping at a chapter titled, "The Wild Man of the Mountains." The description was vague, a large, hairy, human-like creature supposedly inhabiting the remote regions of the Appalachian Range. Sightings dated back to indigenous accounts, continued through early European settlement, and persisted into the modern era. Most were dismissed as misidentified bears, overactive imaginations, or outright hoaxes, but one account, from a hunter in 1923, caught my attention. The creature moved with terrible purpose, not the shambling gait of a bear on hind legs, but the deliberate stride of something that belonged on 2 feet. It took my deer, a full-grown buck I'd just shot, and snapped its neck with one quick twist, as easily as I might wring a dishcloth. I closed the book quickly as I heard footsteps approaching, shoving it back onto the shelf just as Davies walked in. "Planning a camping trip?" he asked, nodding toward the book section. "Just brushing up on local knowledge," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. Never know what the tourists might ask about. The next few weeks were the hardest. I performed my duties mechanically, avoiding assignments that would take me back to that remote section of forest. When asked, I made excuses. The trails there needed maintenance. There were better areas to monitor for the season. Anything to avoid returning to the scene of my encounter. At night, I researched obsessively. I ordered books on cryptozoology, Bigfoot sightings, unexplained phenomena. I created a password-protected folder on my laptop where I compiled every account I could find that resembled what I'd seen. I studied maps of the area, marking caves and remote locations where such a creature might live undetected. I also began to notice things I'd overlooked before. The way certain experienced rangers avoided specific areas of the forest. The knowing looks they exchanged when tourists asked about strange sounds or local legends. The unspoken boundaries that seemed to exist. Areas that were technically part of our jurisdiction but rarely, if ever, patrolled. One evening, about a month after my encounter, I was having a beer with Jim and a few other rangers at the local bar, when the conversation turned to strange experiences in the field. "Ever see anything you couldn't explain out there?" asked Rodriguez, a ranger who'd transferred from Yellowstone the previous year. There were the usual stories. Weird lights that turned out to be poachers, unexplained sounds attributed to weather phenomena, the occasional marijuana-growing operation discovered in remote locations. But then Jim, after his 4th beer, grew serious. "There are things in those mountains that don't make it into the reports," he said quietly. "Things we don't talk about because nobody would believe us anyway." The table fell silent. I felt my heart rate quicken. "Like what?" I finally asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jim looked at me, his eyes slightly unfocused from the alcohol but still penetrating. "Like the reason we don't patrol the northeastern ridge after sunset. Like why we always go in pairs to the Blackwater caves. Like why every few years we find abandoned camping gear, high-end stuff nobody would just leave behind, with no sign of the owners." Rodriguez laughed nervously. "Come on, man. You're just trying to spook us." Jim shrugged, draining his beer. "Believe what you want, but there's a reason the old-timers have rules that don't make it into the handbooks." The conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake Jim's words. Was it possible he knew? That other rangers had seen what I'd seen but, like me, kept their experiences to themselves out of fear of ridicule or worse? 2 months after my encounter, I was finally beginning to regain some semblance of normalcy. The nightmares had become less frequent, my appetite had returned, and I'd stopped jumping at every unexpected sound. I still avoided that section of forest, but I'd managed to convince myself that what I'd seen was a one-in-a-million occurrence, unlikely to ever happen again. Then came the news that would shatter my fragile peace. A hiker had gone missing. A solo backpacker who'd set out for a week-long trek through the northeastern section of the forest. 3 days into his planned route, he'd missed his scheduled check-in with his girlfriend. By day 5, with no word and no response to emergency pings on his satellite phone, she'd reported him missing. As rangers, we were all called in for the search and rescue operation. Maps were spread out, teams assigned, search grids established. I stared at the map, my blood running cold as I realized his planned route would have taken him within 2 miles of the cave where I'd witnessed the creature. "Davis, you'll take grid section E7 with Harkins," the search coordinator announced, pointing to an area that included that very location. I felt the blood drain from my face. I'm more familiar with the western trails," I stammered. "Maybe I should." "You've logged plenty of hours in the northeast section," the coordinator cut me off, "and we need experienced people in the more remote areas. You're with Harkins, section E7. I looked to Jim, hoping for a reprieve, but he just nodded, his expression unreadable. As we geared up for the search, I debated whether to tell Jim what I knew, what I'd seen. This wasn't just about my reputation anymore. A man's life could be at stake. But would telling him help? Or would it just waste valuable time as I tried to convince him of something that sounded impossible? "You okay, kid?" Jim asked as we loaded our packs into his truck. "You look like you're about to puke." I took a deep breath. "Jim, there's something you should know about that area." He paused, hand on the truck door, and gave me a long look. "I'm listening. Maybe I should learn to be a little more open-minded in sharing my experiences. Even so, in this field of work, I just feel so apprehensive about the whole thing. I wanted to know if you had any guesses of what it is that happened." The drive to our search area was tense. After I'd told Jim everything, the unauthorized exploration, the mountain lion, the creature, my months of secret research, he'd fallen into a heavy silence. He didn't laugh or dismiss my story, which was somehow more unnerving than if he had. "You should have told me sooner," was all he said as we neared the trailhead that would lead us to our assigned search grid. "You believe me?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Jim parked the truck and turned to face me, his expression grave. "Let's just say you're not the first ranger to see something that doesn't fit into our understanding of these mountains." A chill ran through me. "You've seen it too?" He shook his head. "Not personally, but I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've heard stories, found evidence I couldn't explain, lost good people." He reached into the back seat and pulled out a rifle I hadn't noticed before. Not the standard issue we sometimes carried for protection against aggressive wildlife, but something heavier, more powerful. "This isn't standard search and rescue equipment," I noted, my mouth suddenly dry. "No, it's not." Jim checked the chamber, then loaded the rifle with practiced efficiency. "We'll follow protocol, search our grid, call out for the missing hiker, but we stay together, we get out before dark, and if we see anything that doesn't look right, we leave immediately." "Understood?" I nodded, a mixture of validation and fresh fear coursing through me. Jim believed me, which meant the creature was real. But that same reality now meant we were deliberately walking into its territory. The search began methodically. We called the missing hiker's name every few hundred yards, checked for signs of passage, documented our progress on our GPS units. The forest felt different this time, perhaps because I wasn't alone, perhaps because I now knew what might be watching from the shadows. As we moved deeper into our assigned grid, I began to recognize landmarks from my ill-fated solo expedition. That distinctive split tree, the unusual rock formation, the small stream cutting through the forest floor. We were getting close to the cave. "Jim," I said quietly, pointing ahead. "The cliff face is just beyond that rise. The cave is at the base." He nodded, adjusting his grip on the rifle. "We'll approach slowly. Keep calling for the hiker. If he's injured or lost, he needs to know help is coming. And if something else hears us," Jim's jaw tightened, "then at least we won't be taken by surprise." We continued forward, our calls for the missing hiker seeming to be swallowed by the increasingly dense forest. The afternoon light was fading faster than it should have, the canopy overhead thickening until it felt like twilight despite being only mid-afternoon. And then, just as we crested the small rise that would give us a view of the cliff face, Jim froze, raising his hand in the universal signal to stop. I halted beside him, straining to hear what had caught his attention. There, a sound like branches breaking, but too rhythmic, too deliberate. Something large was moving through the forest ahead of us, moving away from our position. Jim raised the rifle, sighting along the barrel, but there was nothing visible through the dense undergrowth. After a moment, the sounds faded, leaving only the unnatural silence I remembered all too well from my first visit to this place. "What do you think?" I whispered. "Could be a bear," Jim replied, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Let's keep moving, but stay alert." We approached the cliff face cautiously, the cave entrance now visible below. There was no sign of the mountain lion carcass I'd seen months ago. Scavengers would have long since picked it clean, the bones scattered or carried off. The cave mouth yawned dark and foreboding, a black void against the gray stone of the cliff. No sounds emerged from its depths, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Evaluating, waiting, Jim approached first, rifle at the ready, while I scanned the surrounding forest for any movement. The entrance was larger than I remembered, easily 10 feet high and almost as wide. The ground before it packed hard and smooth from years, perhaps centuries, of use. "Hello?" Jim called into the darkness. "Ranger service. Anyone in there?" His voice echoed briefly, then was absorbed by the darkness. No response. Jim pulled a powerful flashlight from his pack and shone it into the cave. The beam penetrated perhaps 30 feet before the darkness swallowed it, revealing a passage that seemed to curve slightly to the right before disappearing deeper into the earth. "We need to check inside," Jim said grimly. "The hiker could be in there, injured." I knew he was right, but every instinct screamed against entering that darkness. "If the creature lives there, then it's not home right now," Jim finished. "We heard it moving away from here. This might be our only chance to search safely." Reluctantly, I nodded, pulling out my own flashlight. Together, we stepped into the mouth of the cave, the temperature dropping noticeably as we left the filtered sunlight behind. The cave floor was surprisingly even, descending gradually as the passage curved. Our flashlight beams revealed scrape marks on the walls about 7 feet up, as if something tall had brushed against the stone repeatedly over time. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something musky and rank that made my nose wrinkle. About 50 feet in, the passage widened into a larger chamber. Our lights played across the space, revealing what could only be described as a living area. A depression in the floor lined with dried grass and leaves formed a crude bed. Scattered around the chamber were objects that stopped us in our tracks. A torn backpack, a dented metal water bottle, the remains of a hiking boot. "Jesus," Jim breathed, moving closer to examine the items. "Some of this looks recent." I forced myself to approach, shining my light on the backpack. The fabric was weathered but not ancient, the design modern. Jim carefully opened it, revealing energy bar wrappers, a broken compass, and a waterproof wallet. He opened the wallet with gloved hands, extracting a driver's license. "Michael Thurman," he read, then looked up at me with grim eyes. "Reported missing last hunting season, 5 months ago." I swallowed hard, my flashlight beam tracking across the rest of the chamber. Against one wall lay a pile of bones, some clearly animal, others disturbingly long and straight. My light caught something partially buried in the packed earth floor, a glint of metal. Moving closer, I crouched down for a better look. It was a watch. The face cracked, but the metal band still intact. Beside it, partially exposed, was what appeared to be a human finger bone. "Jim," I called, my voice tight. "I think I found..." A sound from deeper in the cave cut me off. A shuffling, dragging sound I recognized immediately. The same sound I'd heard before the creature emerged to kill the mountain lion. Jim was beside me in an instant, rifle raised. "We need to go. Now." We backed toward the entrance, flashlights trained on the dark passage that led deeper into the cave. The shuffling grew louder, accompanied by that same deep guttural breathing I remembered from my first encounter. "Run," Jim hissed, and we turned, abandoning stealth for speed as we raced back up the passage toward daylight. Behind us, a roar erupted, part animal fury, part human rage, the sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very walls of the cave. The creature had discovered our intrusion, and it was coming. We burst from the cave entrance, the fading afternoon light momentarily blinding after the darkness within. Without pausing, we sprinted for the tree line, seeking the cover of the forest. Jim moved with surprising speed for his age, the rifle clutched firmly in his hands as he led the way back toward the trail. The roar came again, closer now, and I risked a glance back over my shoulder. The creature stood framed in the cave entrance, its massive silhouette blotting out the light behind it. Even at this distance, I could see it scenting the air, turning its head in our direction. Then it began to move, dropping to all fours like a gorilla, covering ground with terrifying speed. "It's coming," I gasped, redoubling my pace. Jim didn't look back, just angled slightly to the left, away from the direct path back to the trail. "We can't outrun it," he panted. "Need to find a place to make a stand." The logic was sound but horrifying. This thing had killed a mountain lion with its bare hands. What chance did we have, even with Jim's rifle? We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, branches breaking, undergrowth being flattened by a massive body moving at speed. Ahead, the ground began to rise sharply. Jim headed straight for what appeared to be a rockfall, a jumble of boulders creating a natural barrier about 15 feet high. "There," he called. "We can climb up. Get the high ground." We reached the rocks and began to climb, the rough stone cutting into my hands as I hauled myself upward. Jim scrambled up beside me, more agile than his age would suggest. We reached the top just as the creature burst from the forest below. In the clear afternoon light, I got my first good look at what had haunted my nightmares for months. It stood upright now, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur that hung in matted clumps. Its body was powerfully muscled, the shoulders impossibly broad, arms hanging almost to its knees. The face, God, the face, was a nightmarish blend of ape and human features, with a heavy brow ridge shadowing deep-set eyes that gleamed with unmistakable intelligence and rage. Jim raised the rifle, taking careful aim. "I don't want to do this," he muttered almost to himself. "It might be the last of its kind." The creature roared again, beating its massive chest with fists the size of dinner plates. Then it charged the rockfall, covering the distance in seconds, and began to climb. Jim fired. The shot echoed through the forest, and the creature jerked as the bullet found its mark in the shoulder. It howled, a sound of pain and fury that raised the hair on the back of my neck, but didn't slow its ascent. Jim chambered another round, fired again. This shot caught the creature in the upper chest. It faltered, clinging to the rocks with one massive hand, dark blood matting the fur where the bullets had struck. For a moment our eyes met, the creature's and mine. In that gaze I saw not just animal rage but something else, intelligence, awareness, a depth of being I hadn't expected. It knew what we were, it understood the weapon Jim held, and it hated us with a profound ancient hatred that transcended mere territorial aggression. Then Jim fired a third time, and the creature fell backward, tumbling down the rockfall to land in a heap at the base. It lay still, and for a moment I thought it was over. Then, incredibly, it began to move again, pushing itself up on one arm, dark blood now pouring from multiple wounds. It looked up at us once more, and made a sound I'll never forget. Not a roar this time, but something almost like speech. Guttural and halting but patterned, purposeful. Jim's face had gone pale. He raised the rifle one last time, aimed carefully, and fired. The creature's head snapped back, and this time when it fell, it didn't move again. The silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no insects, as if the entire forest held its breath. "Is it?" I couldn't finish the question. Jim lowered the rifle slowly. "Yes." His voice was hollow, his face etched with something that looked like grief. "God help me, I think it is." Was this really a Bigfoot's den? Or was this thing invading the mountain lion's den? Because you need to know that seeing this thing kill a mountain lion in front of me with such ease, twisting its neck like it was crumpling up a piece of paper so effortlessly, and then shucking its body as hard as it could against the base of a fir tree, breaking its spine and seeing it just slump and die there. You don't just see anything that makes a mountain lion look like that. We're talking about an animal of considerable force and size, something I myself would run far, far away from. Whatever that creature is, Bigfoot or not, I want nothing to do with it. We stood on that rocky outcrop for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring down at the motionless form below. Neither of us seemed eager to approach, to confirm what we'd done. Finally, Jim sighed deeply. "We need to call this in." I turned to him, incredulous. "Call it in? And say what exactly? That we just shot and killed a Bigfoot?" Jim rubbed his weathered face with one hand, suddenly looking every year of his age and then some. "No. We say we found evidence relating to the missing hiker, which is true. We say we were attacked by an animal. Also true." He looked at me steadily. "We don't mention size, appearance, or anything else that sounds unbelievable. But Jim, this could be the scientific discovery of the century. A new species, a missing link, something completely unknown to science." "You think they'll let it be a scientific discovery?" Jim's voice was bitter. "This forest would be overrun with trophy hunters, media, government agents. Every crackpot with a rifle would be out here trying to bag their own specimen, and if there are more of them..." He shook his head. "They've survived this long by staying hidden. Maybe that's how it should remain." I wanted to argue, but deep down, I knew he was right. I'd spent months researching cryptid sightings, the aftermath of supposed Bigfoot evidence. Most was debunked, ridiculed. The few researchers who maintained their claims were ostracized from the scientific community. Their careers effectively ended. And Jim was right about something else, too. The forest would be destroyed in the ensuing circus. Any other creatures like this one would be hunted to extinction. So what do we do? I asked. Jim checked his watch. We're overdue for a check-in. I'll radio in, report that we found evidence of the missing hiker in a cave, and that we were attacked by a large predator, possibly a bear. I was forced to shoot it. We'll request a recovery team, and when they get here and see that, I nodded toward the creature's body. It won't be here. Jim's expression was grim but determined. We have about 2 hours until a team could reach this location. We need to move fast. What followed was the most surreal experience of my life. We descended the rockfall cautiously, Jim's rifle still at the ready in case the creature was somehow still alive. It wasn't. Up close, it was even more imposing. The hands alone were twice the size of mine, the muscular arms thicker than my thighs. Jim directed me to gather firewood while he used his hunting knife to collect samples, tufts of hair, scraps of skin, and, after a moment's hesitation, a single tooth that had been dislodged by his final shot. These he carefully wrapped and stowed in his pack. Evidence, he said simply when he saw my questioning look. Just in case, someday, the world is ready. We built a pyre around the creature's body, using dead fallen branches soaked in the emergency fuel Jim carried for winter rescues. As the flames took hold, we stood in silence, watching smoke rise through the canopy above. I've been a ranger for 30 years, Jim said quietly. Seen things most people wouldn't believe. Mountain lions taking down elk, bears fishing salmon from rivers, birth and death and everything in between. He paused, his eyes reflecting the flames. But I never thought I'd see this. Never thought I'd have to make this kind of decision. I understood his conflict. We were destroying evidence of something extraordinary, something that could rewrite our understanding of the natural world. But we were also protecting the forest we'd sworn to serve, and possibly protecting other creatures like this one that might still roam its depths. We waited until the fire had done its work, then scattered the ashes and charred remains as best we could. By the time we finished, darkness was falling, and we needed to make our way back to meet the incoming search team. Jim radioed in our location, reporting that we'd found signs of the missing hiker in a cave, including his backpack and wallet. He explained that we'd been attacked by a large animal which he'd been forced to shoot, but that in the ensuing confusion we'd been separated from the remains. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. The recovery team met us about a mile from the cave. They were primarily focused on the evidence of the missing hiker, accepting Jim's account of the animal attack without much questioning. His reputation and 30 years of service gave his words weight that my story alone would never have carried. In the days that followed, a more thorough search was conducted. The cave yielded more evidence, not just of the hiker we'd been searching for, but of at least 3 other missing persons cases dating back several years. The official report attributed the deaths to predator activity, likely bear, though the forensic evidence was inconclusive. The case was closed. The families received closure, if not comfort. The forest continued to be protected and preserved, and if certain areas were now marked as environmentally sensitive and restricted from public access, few questioned it. Jim retired 3 months later. Before he left, he called me into his office and handed me a small metal box with a key. Safety deposit box, he explained. First National Bank in town. The samples are inside, along with my detailed report of what really happened. Your name's on the account too. He held my gaze steadily. Someday, when the time is right, when people might actually believe it without destroying everything trying to prove it, you'll know what to do with it. I've carried that key for 5 years now. I've continued my work as a ranger, watching over the forest with new eyes, a new understanding of the secrets it holds. I've heard the stories from other parks, other wilderness areas. Sightings, encounters, evidence that doesn't quite fit the known catalog of North American wildlife. I've never seen another creature like the one Jim and I encountered that day. Perhaps it was the last of its kind. Perhaps the others, if they exist, have learned to be more cautious around humans. Or perhaps they've simply retreated deeper into the remaining wild places, areas where even rangers rarely venture. What I do know is that the wilderness is vaster and more mysterious than most people realize. Our understanding of it, scientific, rational, cataloged, is still just a thin veneer over depths we've barely begun to explore. So I continue my patrols. I warn hikers to stay on marked trails, to make noise while hiking, to properly store their food, all the standard precautions against bears and other known predators. And if I sometimes add a few extra warnings, if I discourage solo hiking in certain areas, if I make sure every visitor understands that the forest demands respect, well, that's just me being a thorough ranger. Because now I know what Jim meant when he told me, all those years ago, that the mountains have secrets, things that don't make it into the training manuals, things that perhaps shouldn't. And you, anonymous readers on the internet, are now the only others who know the full truth of what I experienced. I've never told another soul in person. Not my colleagues, not my friends, certainly not my superiors. As I said at the beginning, I was too scared of losing my job, of being called crazy or worse. But maybe, by sharing this story, I'm finally taking the first step toward the day when Jim's samples can emerge from that safety deposit box, when the world might be ready to accept that our understanding of nature is still incomplete, that there are creatures yet undiscovered, even in our own backyards. Until then, if you find yourself hiking in the mountains of West Virginia, or any wilderness really, stay alert, make noise, keep to the trails, and if the forest around you suddenly goes quiet, if you hear something that sounds like a human scream but not quite, don't investigate. Turn around. Go back the way you came. Return to safety, because some mysteries are best left unsolved, some creatures best left undisturbed, and some stories perhaps best left untold. My name is Ahate Begay, which means restless one in Navajo. My grandfather used to joke that my ancestors knew what I would become long before I was born. I can still hear his gravelly laugh when I told him I was taking the ranger position in Denali. "The mountains are calling you home, grandson," he said, tapping his weathered fingers against his knee. "But remember, not everything that watches from the trees is there to protect you." I dismissed his warning as the superstition of an old man who'd spent too many years listening to tribal stories around campfires. I knew better. I had a forestry degree from the University of Montana and 3 summers of seasonal work in Yellowstone under my belt. Alaska was just the next logical step. The truth is, I needed to escape. The crushing weight of $68,000 in student loans had become unbearable, especially after my father's medical bills started piling up. Pancreatic cancer doesn't care about your financial situation. My girlfriend Lauren had grown tired of my constant stress and late-night shifts at the local brewery to make ends meet. The relationship collapsed like a rotting log under too much weight. The Denali position offered housing, a small cabin on the eastern edge of the park, and a salary that would at least let me chip away at my debts. More importantly, it offered solitude, space to breathe, room to forget. I arrived in early March when the park was still blanketed in snow. The cabin was more rustic than I'd expected. A single-room structure with a wood stove, small kitchenette, and a bed pushed against the far wall. The bathroom was an outhouse 20 yards away, a frigid journey on winter mornings, but the view from my front porch stretched for miles across undulating white terrain toward the distant mountains. In that moment, I felt something loosen in my chest. This was where I belonged. My duties were fairly standard: patrolling designated trails, assisting lost hikers, monitoring wildlife activity, and educating visitors about park regulations. During the winter months, the tourist traffic slowed to a trickle, mostly experienced backcountry enthusiasts and the occasional photographer hoping to capture the aurora borealis. The isolation didn't bother me. I'd always been comfortable with silence. My small collection of books, my guitar, and the endless wilderness were company enough. I filled my evenings writing in my journal, plotting constellations through my cabin window, and listening to the distant howls of wolves. For the first time in years, I slept soundly. That changed on April 13th. Exactly 6 weeks after my arrival. I was returning from a routine patrol along the eastern boundary. The sun had begun its reluctant descent, painting the snow in shades of amber and gold. About a quarter mile from my cabin, I noticed tracks crossing my path. Not unusual in itself, the park teemed with wildlife, but these were different. They appeared human at first glance, but elongated, with what looked like claws extending from the toes. They seemed to follow my morning tracks perfectly before veering off into the dense forest. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crept up my spine. I quickened my pace, suddenly aware of how quickly darkness was falling. The forest had gone quiet. No bird calls, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Just silence and the sound of my own breathing. I reached for my radio, a habit when something felt off, but stopped. What would I report? Strange footprints? A feeling? I'd be laughed out of the ranger station. As I approached my cabin, I noticed smoke curling from the chimney. Strange. I hadn't left the fire burning. Perhaps Jake, the senior ranger who occasionally checked on me, had stopped by. But his truck wasn't parked outside. I hesitated at the tree line, studying my cabin. The curtains were drawn, I never drew them, and a shadow moved across the window. Someone was inside. My hand moved to the bear spray on my belt. I considered my options: confront the intruder, radio for backup, or retreat into the forest and wait. Pride won out. This was my home, my territory. I approached cautiously, boots crunching on the crusty snow. The door was shut but unlocked, just as I'd left it. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. The cabin was empty. The fire burned low in the stove, as if it had been lit hours ago. Nothing appeared disturbed or out of place, but the air felt different, heavier somehow, carrying a musty animal smell beneath the wood smoke. I checked every corner, convinced someone had been there moments before. Finding nothing, I chalked it up to exhaustion and an overactive imagination. But that night, as I lay in bed listening to the wind whisper through the pines, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had found me. Something that knew my name and had been waiting for me to venture this far from civilization. Something my grandfather had tried to warn me about. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Isolation plays tricks on the mind. That's what they tell you during ranger training. I had been working long hours, and the Alaskan wilderness isn't forgiving to newcomers. The strange tracks were probably just a deformed bear print, melted and refrozen into an unnatural shape. I reported for duty at the main ranger station, a 40-minute drive from my cabin. My supervisor, Frank, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard who'd spent 20 years in Denali, handed me my assignment for the day. "Got a couple of backpackers who haven't checked in," he said, sliding a map toward me. "They were supposed to camp here," he pointed to a spot about 5 miles from my cabin, "and radio in this morning. Nothing yet. Weather's been good," I said. "Maybe they just slept in." Frank's expression didn't change. "Maybe, but Toklat section reported unusual predator activity in that area last night. Probably just wolves, but we both knew wolves rarely bothered experienced hikers." I nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. "I'll find them," I promised, already plotting my route. It was early afternoon by the time I reached the hikers' last known location. Their campsite was intact but abandoned. The tent remained properly secured, cooking equipment neatly stowed. No signs of a panicked departure or animal attack. Their backpacks were still there, containing wallets, cell phones, and extra clothing. Only their boots and jackets were missing. I called their names, Michael and Sarah, according to their wilderness permits, but received no response except my own echo bouncing through the trees. I radioed Frank with an update and began searching in widening circles around the camp. 2 hours later, I found a single boot half buried in snow, about a mile north of the campsite. Beyond it, a disturbed trail led deeper into a dense stand of black spruce. I radioed my position and followed the trail, noting with growing unease that the prints changed gradually from normal boot impressions to something else. The same elongated, claw-tipped marks I'd seen near my cabin. The forest grew darker as the canopy thickened overhead. The temperature seemed to drop with each step. I found myself whispering the hikers' names rather than calling them, some primitive part of my brain suddenly afraid of drawing attention. A branch snapped somewhere to my right. I froze, hand moving instinctively to my sidearm. "Michael? Sarah?" I kept my voice low. No response, but I felt it then, eyes watching from somewhere in the shadows. Not animal, not human, but something aware and calculating. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I drew my gun and swept it slowly across my field of vision. Nothing moved, but the sensation of being observed intensified. My radio crackled, making me jump. "Big A, come in. What's your status?" Frank's voice, distorted with static. I raised the radio to respond when I saw it. A flash of movement about 50 yards ahead. A figure darted between trees, too quick to make out clearly. Taller than a man, moving with an unnatural gait. "I've got movement," I whispered into the radio. "Possible suspect, moving north." "Say again, Big A." "You're breaking up." The radio emitted a high-pitched squeal that made me wince. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. I continued forward cautiously until I reached a small clearing. In its center lay Sarah's jacket, spread out neatly on the snow, as if placed there deliberately. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just a jacket in the middle of nowhere, miles from where it should be. As I approached to examine it, I noticed something scratched into the bark of a nearby tree. At first I thought it was bear marks, but looking closer I could make out a crude symbol, a stick figure with elongated limbs and an oversized head with antlers or horns. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "The skinwalker wears the flesh of its victims, learns their thoughts, mimics their voices, and it's always hungry for more." I backed away, suddenly certain I didn't want to touch that jacket. A low, keening sound drifted through the trees. Not quite human, not quite animal. "Frank," I spoke into the radio, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need backup. Now." This time the only response was static. Darkness was falling fast, much faster than it should have. I made the difficult decision to return to the hikers' campsite to secure their belongings and set up a proper search for the morning. Moving quickly but quietly, I retraced my steps, constantly scanning the forest around me. I was halfway back when I heard it. A woman's voice calling my name. "Ahodi?" Is that you? It sounded exactly like Sarah, though I'd never met her. I froze, heart pounding. Help me, please. The voice continued, coming from somewhere to my left. I'm hurt. Every instinct screamed danger. In the fading light, I could see nothing moving among the trees. Sarah? I called back, keeping my gun raised. I'm Ranger Begay. Where are you? A rustle of movement, then silence. I waited, barely breathing. A hoot. The voice came again, but different now. Deeper, raspier, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison. We've been waiting for you. I ran. Dignity and protocol forgotten, I sprinted back toward the campsite, branches whipping against my face. Behind me, something crashed through the underbrush, moving faster than I could, gaining ground with each second. I reached the campsite and didn't stop, continuing toward my truck, parked a quarter-mile away. The crashing pursuit suddenly ceased, but I didn't slow down until my hand was on the door handle. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced back. At the edge of the forest stood a figure. In the dim light, I could just make out its shape. Like a man, but wrong somehow. Shoulders too broad, arms too long. It wore what looked like Michael's red jacket, but the face, I couldn't see a face, just darkness where features should be. I threw myself into the truck, started the engine and drove away, hands shaking on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, the figure remained motionless at the tree line, watching me leave. When I finally reached the ranger station, Frank was waiting with a search and rescue team ready to deploy. I gave my report, careful to stick to the facts. Abandoned campsite, single boot, jacket in the clearing. I omitted the voice, the strange figure, the feeling of being hunted. Frank looked skeptical enough already. We'll head out at first light, he decided. Too dangerous in the dark. You look like hell, Begay. Get some rest. But as I drove back to my isolated cabin, I knew rest would be impossible. Because something had found me in the wilderness, something that knew my name, and I had a sickening feeling it would be waiting for me when I returned home. I didn't go straight back to my cabin that night. Instead, I pulled into the small diner in Healy, about 20 miles from the park entrance. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of locals nursing coffees at the counter. I slid into a booth in the corner and ordered the strongest coffee they had. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I kept seeing that figure in the red jacket, standing at the edge of the trees. I kept hearing that voice, Sarah's voice changing into something else, something ancient and hungry. You all right, honey? The waitress, a weathered woman in her 60s named Maggie, set a steaming mug in front of me. Look like you've seen a ghost? I forced a smile. Long day. Lost hikers, she nodded knowingly. They turn up? Not yet. I wrapped my hands around the mug, grateful for its warmth. Search starts again tomorrow. Maggie hesitated, then leaned closer. Where'd they go missing? I told her the general area, and her face changed subtly. She glanced toward the other customers before lowering her voice. That's near the old hunting grounds. Bad place. She tapped her fingers nervously on the table. Natives won't go there. Say the trees have eyes. Under normal circumstances, I would have dismissed her words as local superstition. But after what I'd seen, what else do they say? I pressed. Maggie shrugged. Just stories. People go missing. Animals act strange. My ex-husband, he was Athabascan. He called it the thin place. Said the barrier between worlds is weaker there. She straightened up, suddenly self-conscious. Anyway, just be careful out there. Another coffee? I declined and paid my bill. Outside, night had fully descended, clear and cold with stars piercing the blackness. The normalcy of the diner had steadied me somewhat, but as I drove toward my cabin, the forest pressing close on either side of the narrow road, the fear crept back. I kept my high beams on, irrationally scared of what might be lurking just beyond their reach. Twice I thought I saw movement along the roadside, a tall, gangly shape loping between trees. But when I slowed, nothing was there. My cabin was dark when I arrived. I sat in the truck for several minutes, scanning the tree line, before summoning the courage to go inside. I entered with my flashlight in one hand and my gun in the other, sweeping every corner before turning on the lights. Everything was as I'd left it. Still, I checked the locks on the windows, barricaded the door with a chair, and built up the fire until the cabin was almost uncomfortably warm. I knew I wouldn't sleep, so I made coffee and pulled out my laptop. If I was facing something supernatural, I needed information. I began researching Native American legends about shapeshifters, particularly those from southwestern tribes. My grandfather was Navajo, and the Skinwalker, or Yinald-Lushi, was part of their mythology. But similar creatures appeared in stories from tribes across North America. According to the legends, skinwalkers were once human, usually medicine men or shamans who had broken tribal taboos to gain supernatural powers. They could transform into animals or wear the skins of their victims, absorbing their memories and abilities. They were known for mimicking human voices to lure victims away from safety. Most accounts suggested they couldn't be killed by normal means. Some mentioned silver bullets or specific rituals. Others claimed the only defense was to speak the skinwalker's true name, its human name from before its transformation. I was deep in my research when a sound outside made me freeze, a soft scratching at my door, like claws on wood. I muted my laptop and reached for my gun, every muscle tense. The scratching stopped, replaced by a gentle knocking. "Ahote?" A man's voice, familiar somehow. "It's Michael. I got separated from Sarah. Can you help me?" My mouth went dry. Michael, the missing hiker I'd been searching for, the owner of the red jacket. "Park ranger," the voice continued, a slight tremor making it sound authentically frightened. "Please, I'm freezing out here." I stood silently, gun trained on the door, breath shallow. "I can see your light," the voice said, turning petulant. "I know you're in there." Something heavy thudded against the door, making the chair I'd wedged against it shudder. Then again, harder. "Let me in," the voice rasped, dropping any pretense of humanity. "Let me in." The pounding intensified, the door frame beginning to splinter. I backed toward the rear window, calculating my chances if I had to flee into the forest. Suddenly, headlights swept across the front of the cabin. A vehicle approached. Frank's truck. The pounding instantly ceased. I ran to the door, dragged the chair away, and flung it open, gun ready. Nothing was there except deep gouges in the wood where something with long claws had tried to force its way in. Frank's truck pulled up, and he stepped out, looking concerned. "Big A? Everything okay?" "Dispatch said you called for backup." I stared at him blankly. "I didn't call anyone." Frank's expression darkened. "Dispatch got a call from your cabin phone 20 minutes ago. Man saying he was you, claiming an intruder was trying to break in." My blood ran cold. The cabin didn't have a landline. My cell phone had been in my pocket all night. "Get in the truck," Frank said quietly, eyeing the scratched door. "You're not staying here tonight." As we drove away, I glanced back at my cabin. A tall figure stood in the doorway, watching us leave. In the red glow of the taillights, it raised one elongated hand in a mocking wave. Frank didn't see it. But as we rounded the curve, I heard his radio crackle to life. "Ranger Bigay, please respond," said a voice that was a perfect imitation of my own. "I think it's inside my cabin now. Please hurry." Frank's eyes met mine in the dim light of the dashboard. "What the hell is going on out here?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer, but I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was hunting in these woods wasn't going to stop until it had what it wanted, and somehow, I knew it wanted me. I spent that night at Frank's house, a modest two-bedroom on the outskirts of Healy. His wife Julie, a nurse at the local clinic, made up the couch for me without asking questions. Their German shepherd, Max, seemed agitated by my presence, pacing the living room and growling softly whenever I moved. "He's usually friendly," Julie apologized, stroking the dog's head. "Must be picking up on something, or smelling something," I thought but didn't say. I wondered if some scent clung to me now, the musk of the creature that had followed me from the forest. I slept fitfully, waking at every creak of the house settling. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and went to the kitchen for water. Max followed, keeping his distance, eyes fixed on me warily. Julie found me there an hour later, surrounded by books Frank had brought home from the ranger station archives. Historical accounts of the region, incident reports, disappearances. "Find anything?" she asked, starting coffee. I rubbed my eyes. "Maybe. There's a pattern of disappearances in that eastern section of the park. Going back decades." She nodded, unsurprised. "The old-timers call it the hungry ground. They say it takes one person every generation." I looked up sharply. "Takes?" Julie hesitated. "My grandmother was Koyukon. She had stories, said something lives in those woods. Something that needs to feed but can only do so under certain conditions." "What conditions?" She poured coffee for both of us. "When someone enters its territory who's running from something, someone with darkness in them." She studied my face. "You running from something, Ahote?" The question hit closer to home than she could know. I was running, from debt, from failure, from the memory of my father's wasted face as cancer consumed him, from my own guilt at feeling relieved when he finally died. "Just looking for a fresh start," I muttered. Julie's expression softened. "We all are, but some places they sense the wounded ones. They call to them." Frank entered before I could respond, already dressed in his uniform. "Search teams assembling at 0600, he informed me. "You sure you're up for this?" I nodded, though every instinct told me to get in my truck and drive south until Alaska was a distant memory. "I want to find those hikers," I said. And I did. though I was increasingly certain we wouldn't find them alive. The briefing room was crowded with rangers and volunteers, maps spread across tables and a buzz of purposeful activity. Frank outlined the search parameters, dividing us into teams of 3. To my surprise, he assigned himself and Jake, the most experienced ranger after him, to accompany me back to the area where I'd found the jacket. "We'll focus on the northern quadrant," Frank announced. "Satellite imagery shows some unusual disturbances in the tree canopy about 2 miles from the hiker's last known position. Could be nothing, but we'll check it out." As the teams dispersed, an elderly native man who had been sitting quietly in the corner approached me. He introduced himself as Thomas, one of the park's cultural liaisons with local tribes. "You found a symbol carved in a tree," he said. "Not a question. How did you know?" His weathered face remained impassive. "I've seen it before. My people call it the Mark of the Wendigo." "Wendigo?" I frowned. I thought that was an Algonquian legend from the Northeast. Thomas shrugged. "Different tribes, different names. Skinwalker, Wendigo, Kushtaka. The thing behind the names is the same, a hunger that can never be satisfied." He pressed something into my palm. "Carry this. It may help." I opened my hand to find a small leather pouch on a cord. "Medicine bag," he explained. "For protection." I slipped it around my neck, thanking him. I wasn't sure I believed in its power, but at this point, I'd take whatever help I could get. The day was overcast, heavy clouds hanging low over the mountains as our team set out. We retraced my route from yesterday, first to the abandoned campsite, then to where I'd found the boot and jacket. Frank said little, but I could tell he was disturbed by the strange tracks and the symbol carved into the tree. "Seen anything like this before?" I asked, as he examined the crude antlered figure. He shook his head. 20 years in these woods, and no. But he hesitated. "There was an incident, back in '98, before my time. Ranger disappeared in this area. They found his gear scattered over miles, like breadcrumbs. Never found him." "What was his name?" I asked, suddenly cold despite my layers. "Daniel Blackwood. Navajo guy, like you. Young, by all accounts. Transferred from Yellowstone." The parallels weren't lost on me. I touched the medicine bag under my jacket. We pressed on toward the area of disturbed canopy Frank had mentioned. The forest grew denser, the trees older and more gnarled. Few animals crossed our path, and those that did, a fox, a snowshoe hare, seemed unnaturally skittish. Around midday, we reached a clearing unlike any I'd seen in the park. Dead trees formed a perfect circle about 30 yards in diameter. Inside, the ground was bare. No snow, no undergrowth, just dark soil that steamed slightly in the cold air. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, stepping toward the circle. Frank grabbed his arm. "Wait." He lifted his radio. "Base, this is Toklat 3. We've found some kind of clearing. Appears geothermally active. Requesting guidance." The radio crackled with static. Frank tried again, then checked the battery. "Interference," he said, frowning. "Let's mark the location and head back. Something doesn't feel right." I agreed wholeheartedly, but as we turned to leave, a sound stopped us. A human cry, faint but distinct, coming from beyond the clearing. "That's Sarah," Jake said, already moving forward. "Has to be." "Jake, wait," Frank called. But Jake was already crossing the dead circle, heading toward the sound. Frank and I followed reluctantly. The moment I stepped into the circle, a wave of nausea hit me. The air felt wrong, thicker somehow, with a metallic taste. The ground beneath my boots seemed to pulse like something alive. We passed through and continued toward the cry, which came again, more urgent now. The forest beyond the clearing was different, older, with massive trees I couldn't identify. Mist curled around their trunks, limiting visibility to a few yards. "Sarah! Michael!" Jake called out. A response came almost immediately. "Help! Over here!" Jake broke into a run. Frank and I followed, struggling to keep sight of him through the mist. When we caught up, he was standing at the edge of a small ravine, looking confused. "I heard them right here," he insisted. "Clear as day." Frank scanned the area, suddenly alert. "We need to go. Now." "What?" "We can't leave if they're—" "Look around you." Frank cut him off. "Notice anything?" I did then. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind in the branches. Even the mist hung motionless. "We're being hunted," Frank said quietly. "Back to the clearing. Stay together." We turned back, moving quickly but cautiously. The mist thickened, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I felt disoriented, uncertain which direction led back to the clearing. A branch snapped behind us. We froze, listening. "A hut," came a whisper, so close it could have been in my ear. "We've been waiting for you." Frank and Jake didn't react. They hadn't heard it. "Something's out there," I warned, drawing my gun. Frank nodded, doing the same. "Fast or slow?" "Fast," I decided. "Head for the clearing." We broke into a run, pushing through the mist. Behind us, something crashed through the underbrush, gaining ground with unnatural speed. Jake stumbled. By the time I turned back, he was on his feet but facing the wrong direction, staring into the mist. "Jake!" I shouted. "This way." He didn't respond. His face had gone slack, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "Mom?" he whispered. Frank grabbed my arm. "Keep moving. He's gone." "We can't just." "He's gone," Frank insisted, pulling me forward. "It's got him. Run or you're next." The clearing appeared ahead, its circle of dead trees a macabre salvation. We sprinted across it, the ground hot and springy beneath our feet. The sensation of being pursued intensified, breath on my neck, claws reaching for my back. We burst from the clearing back into the normal forest, snow crunching under our boots. Frank didn't stop until we'd put 100 yards between us and that accursed circle. "Did we lose it?" I gasped, bending over to catch my breath. Frank stared back the way we'd come. "For now." But we lost Jake too. Guilt crushed me. "We should go back." "No," Frank said firmly. "We get back up. Lots of it. And we come back better prepared." As if in response, an inhuman scream echoed through the forest, a sound of rage and hunger that made my skin crawl. It was quickly cut short. Frank's face was ashen. That was Jake. We radioed for extraction, reporting an officer down, possible hostile presence. When asked for details, Frank was deliberately vague. I understood why. What could we say? That some ancient predator was stalking the forest, wearing human skins and mimicking human voices. As we waited for the helicopter, huddled together with our backs against a large spruce, Frank finally spoke. "My grandfather was Athabascan," he said quietly. "He used to tell me stories about a creature that lived in these mountains, a spirit that could only be defeated by someone who shared its nature." "What does that mean?" I asked. Frank studied me with tired eyes. "It means it chose you, Ahode, and now you have to choose what to do about it." The distant thrum of helicopter blades reached us, but it brought little relief, because I knew Frank was right. The creature, Skinwalker, Wendigo, whatever it was, had marked me somehow. And I had a sickening feeling that no matter how far I ran, it would follow, because we recognized something in each other, a hunger, a darkness, a need that could never be satisfied. And now it had Jake. How long before it took Frank too? Or others? As the helicopter descended, I made my decision. I would stop running. I would hunt the hunter. I just hoped I could do it before it consumed everything I'd come to care about in this wild, beautiful, terrible place. The search for Jake was called off after 3 days. Not officially, of course. On paper, it remained an active missing persons case. But the rangers who'd gone back to the clearing found no trace of him, nor of the strange mist-shrouded forest beyond. The circle of dead trees remained, but it looked ordinary now. Just a natural meadow with poor soil conditions according to the geologist they brought in. Frank and I knew better, but our accounts diverged enough to raise doubts. I mentioned the voice calling Jake's name. Frank hadn't heard it. He described Jake walking toward something only he could see. I remembered him falling before getting up, disoriented. The harder we tried to explain what happened, the more unreliable our testimony seemed. The official report listed Jake as missing, presumed injured in difficult terrain. Search conditions, severely hampered by weather. The truth remained unwritten. Something had taken him, something that could bend perception and reality itself. I was placed on administrative leave pending psychological evaluation. Frank fought to stay on active duty but was assigned to the visitor center, away from field operations. Neither of us was permitted near the eastern section of the park. I spent my days researching, combing through historical records, indigenous legends, even paranormal websites and forums. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that we faced something ancient and cunning. The Wendigo or Skinwalker legends described a being that began as human but was transformed by taboo acts, usually cannibalism, into something monstrous. Once transformed, it was driven by insatiable hunger for human flesh and the desire to corrupt others. What troubled me most was my growing certainty that it had chosen me specifically. Not randomly, not opportunistically, but deliberately, as if it recognized something in me that made me suitable prey, or perhaps a suitable successor. Thomas, the native liaison, was the only one who took my concern seriously. We met privately at his small home just outside the park boundaries. "The medicine bag I gave you," he asked. "Do you still wear it?" I nodded, touching the pouch beneath my shirt. "Good. It won't stop the creature, but it may confuse it. Mask your presence somewhat. I need to know how to kill it," I said bluntly. Thomas's weathered face remained impassive. "You assume it can be killed?" "Everything can be killed, perhaps. but not by ordinary means. He studied me thoughtfully. Why do you think it chose you, Ahot? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. Wrong place, wrong time? Thomas shook his head. These beings are drawn to spiritual weakness, to hunger, guilt, shame, to those running from themselves. His eyes seemed to peer into my soul. What darkness do you carry? I wanted to deny it, to claim I was just an ordinary ranger in extraordinary circumstances. But Thomas deserved the truth. My father, I began, the words painful. When he was dying, part of me was glad. Thomas waited silently for me to continue. He was abusive, not physically but emotionally. Nothing was ever good enough. When he got sick, I came back to care for him because it was expected. But every day watching him suffer, I thought, good, now you know how it feels. I swallowed hard. What kind of son thinks that? A human one, Thomas said softly. We all carry darkness. The creature sensed yours and recognized it as similar to its own. So what do I do? You have two choices, Thomas said. Run as far and as fast as you can. The creature's power is strongest in its territory. Distance may save you. And the second option? His expression grew grave. Face it. But understand, to defeat a Wendigo, one must risk becoming one. I left Thomas's home with a mixture of dread and determination. Running wasn't an option, not with Jake still missing, possibly still alive in some form, not with other hikers and rangers at risk. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was only silence, then a faint, distorted voice. Ahot. Help me. It was Jake's voice, but wrong somehow. Stretched and strained. Jake? Where are you? I'm changing. Can't hold on much longer. It's inside me now. My grip tightened on the phone. Tell me where you are. I'll come get you. The old cabin, Jake's voice whispered. North Ridge. It's using me as bait, Ahote. Don't come alone. The line went dead. I knew the cabin he mentioned, an abandoned trapper's hut about 6 miles from where Jake had disappeared. It wasn't on any official park maps, but rangers knew of it. I should have called Frank immediately. I should have reported the call and waited for backup. But something told me this was between me and the creature now. Anyone else would just become collateral damage. I packed my gear methodically. My service weapon, bear spray, a silver knife Thomas had given me, extra ammunition, flares, first aid kit, water, and food for 2 days. As an afterthought, I added my father's old Zippo lighter and a flask of whiskey. Around my neck, I wore the medicine bag. I left a detailed note for Frank explaining where I'd gone and why, with instructions to call Thomas if I didn't return within 24 hours. Then I set out under the cover of darkness. The night was clear and cold, stars glittering overhead like shards of ice. I drove as far as the service road allowed, then continued on foot. The forest felt different in darkness, more alive somehow. Branches reaching like grasping fingers, shadows moving when they shouldn't. My headlamp carved a narrow tunnel of light through the blackness, beyond which anything might be watching. I followed a faint game trail that wound up toward the ridge. The old cabin was nestled in a small hollow just below the peak, sheltered from the worst of the wind but difficult to find unless you knew where to look. Jake and I had discovered it during a boundary patrol last month. A simple one-room structure with a collapsed roof and rotting walls, not somewhere anyone would willingly seek shelter. As I climbed higher, the forest thinned out, giving way to scrubby brush and exposed rock. The wind picked up, carrying the clean scent of snow and pine, but underneath it, something else, a sour, rotting odor that grew stronger as I approached the ridge. I doused my headlamp about a quarter-mile from the cabin, relying on moonlight to navigate the final stretch. No sense announcing my arrival. Moving silently, I crested the ridge and looked down into the hollow. The cabin was transformed. Where before there had been a decrepit shell, now stood an intact structure. Lamplight glowing warmly in its windows. Smoke curled from a chimney that hadn't existed during my last visit. The incongruity was jarring, like stepping into a different reality. I crouched behind a large boulder, observing. A figure moved past one of the windows, tall and thin but too shadowed to identify. The door opened, and what looked like Jake stepped out, gaze sweeping across the hollow. My heart leapt. He was alive, but as he turned toward the moonlight, I saw his face clearly, gaunt and pale, eyes sunken and dark. He moved oddly, joints bending at unnatural angles. Ahote, he called, voice carrying on the wind. I know you're out there. Come help me. I'm hurt. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't Jake. Not anymore. Whatever stood outside that cabin might wear his face, might use his voice, but something else controlled the body now. I remained hidden, watching as not Jake stalked the perimeter of the clearing, head tilting to catch any sound. Please, he called again, desperation creeping into his tone. It's getting stronger. I can't fight it much longer. I steeled myself and descended from my hiding place, stepping into the open with my gun drawn. "Jake," I called. "Stay where you are." He spun toward me, relief flooding his haggard features. "Thank God. You came alone?" I nodded, keeping my distance. "What happened to you?" "It took me into the forest," Jake said, gesturing vaguely. "Some kind of underground place. There were others there, a hut. Not alive, but not dead either." He shuddered. "It's trying to change me, make me like it. I've been fighting, but..." He doubled over suddenly, a spasm racking his body. When he straightened, his face had changed, features sharper, eyes reflecting the moonlight like an animal's. "You shouldn't have come," he growled, voice deepening. "Now neither of us will leave." I raised my gun. "I'm not here to leave. I'm here to end this." Jake, or what remained of him, laughed, a sound like branches breaking. "You can't kill me with that. I'm already beyond death." "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but I bet it still hurts." I fired twice, hitting him center mass. He staggered backward but didn't fall. Dark fluid leaked from the wounds, not quite blood, too thick and black. His mouth stretched in an impossible grin, jaw extending beyond human limits. My turn. He lunged with inhuman speed. I dove sideways, rolling through snow as claws, actual claws where fingers had been, raked the air where I'd stood. Coming up in a crouch, I fired again, aiming for his legs. He stumbled this time, one knee buckling. "The cabin," he hissed through elongated teeth. "Inside. I'll show you what's happening to me. What will happen to you." Despite every rational thought screaming against it, I found myself following as he dragged himself toward the cabin door. Some compulsion pulled at me, a need to understand, to witness what transformation had overtaken my friend. The cabin's interior was larger than should have been possible. Walls stretching away into shadow. Animal skins hung from rafters. Deer, bear, wolf, but some looked disturbingly human-like. A fire burned in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the floor. Jake collapsed beside the fire, body contorting. "It's almost complete," he gasped, bones visibly shifting beneath his skin. "The change, but it needs more. It needs you." "Why me?" I demanded, keeping my distance. "Because you're like us," came another voice from the shadows, marked by guilt, hollowed by rage. From the darkest corner emerged a figure I recognized with a jolt of horror. Daniel Blackwood, the ranger who'd disappeared decades ago. His form was more changed than Jake's, taller, gaunter, with antlers sprouting from his elongated skull. Yet his face remained recognizably human, frozen in an expression of eternal hunger. "You," I whispered. "You're the original." Blackwood shook his head, antlers swaying. "Merely the caretaker. The hunger was here long before me, before any human walked these mountains." He gestured to Jake. "We need vessels, bodies to carry us, minds to give us purpose. And you think I'll just let you take me?" I kept my gun trained on him, though I doubted it would have much effect. "You're already taken," Blackwood said simply. "From the moment you stepped into our territory with darkness in your heart, we recognized you as one of our own." Jake's transformation was accelerating, limbs elongating grotesquely, spine arching backward at an impossible angle. His screams became less human with each passing second. I backed toward the door but found it gone, only solid wall where it had been. "There's no escape," Blackwood said, almost gently. "Only acceptance. The hunger will consume you regardless. Better to embrace it, become its master rather than its victim." A memory surfaced, Thomas's words. "To defeat a Wendigo, one must risk becoming one." I reached for the medicine bag at my throat, feeling its subtle warmth against my skin. "I know what you are," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "Wendigo, Skinwalker, names for the same corruption." Blackwood inclined his antlered head. "Names have power, but do you know the true name? The first name?" "No," I admitted, "but I know my own." I tore the medicine bag from my neck and hurled it into the fire. It burst into emerald flames, filling the cabin with sweet-smelling smoke. "Ahoda Begay," I declared loudly. "Son of John Begay, I name myself and claim myself." The cabin trembled, walls rippling like disturbed water. Blackwood hissed, stepping back from the spreading smoke. Jake's transforming body convulsed on the floor. "Names have power," I repeated, "and I refuse yours." Thomas had told me the medicine bag contained sage, cedar, and something personal, a strand of my own hair that I'd given him without realizing its purpose. A physical connection to my true self, now activated by fire and intention. The cabin's illusory nature began to dissolve, walls fading to reveal the actual structure. Broken, roofless, open to the night sky. Blackwood's form flickered between human and monstrous, his control weakening. "You can't escape what's inside you," he snarled, The hunger, the rage, the darkness. I don't deny my darkness, I countered. But it doesn't define me, and it gives you no claim on me. I reached for my father's Zippo and the flask of whiskey. In one smooth motion, I doused Blackwood's shifting form and struck the lighter. He ignited like dry tinder, flames racing across his body. His scream split the night, part human, part animal, wholly agonized. Jake's transforming body caught fire as well, the two burning forms writhing together in a grotesque dance. The heat drove me back, out of the disintegrating cabin, and into the snow. Behind me, flames consumed the structure, unnaturally bright and hot. The fire should have been visible for miles, yet somehow I knew no one else would see it. This reckoning was for us alone. From within the inferno came a final, multi-voiced howl, not of pain but of rage and thwarted hunger. Then silence, broken only by the crackling of flames. I watched until dawn, ensuring nothing emerged from the ashes. As the first light crept over the eastern ridge, I approached the smoldering remains cautiously. Where the cabin had stood was now only a perfect circle of scorched earth. At its center lay two objects: Jake's ranger badge, blackened but intact, and a small antler point, polished smooth by years of handling. I pocketed both, knowing I would never speak of what truly happened here. Who would believe me? As I turned to leave, a whisper reached me on the wind. So faint I might have imagined it. Until the next hunger comes. I didn't look back. Spring came to Denali with a violence typical of Alaska. Flash thaws followed by brutal freezes, mudslides and avalanches reshaping the landscape overnight. The eastern section of the park remained closed, officially due to unstable terrain conditions. Unofficially, 3 separate search parties had failed to locate any trace of Jake or the missing hikers. I stayed on despite pressure from park administration to transfer. The psychological evaluation declared me fit for duty but recommended a less isolated posting. I ignored the suggestion. Something bound me to this place now. Not the Wendigo's influence, but a responsibility I couldn't explain to anyone except perhaps Frank. He never asked for details about that night on the ridge. When I returned and handed him Jake's badge without explanation, he simply nodded and locked it in his desk drawer. "Did you end it?" he asked eventually. "I think so," I replied honestly. For now, that seemed enough for him. We settled into a careful routine, partnering on patrols, avoiding discussion of what we'd experienced. Occasionally, I'd catch him watching me with a mixture of concern and wariness, wondering perhaps if something of the creature had followed me back from that burning cabin. I wondered the same thing sometimes. The nightmares were frequent at first. Dreams of running through endless forests, pursued by something that wore my own face. Dreams of hunger so profound it hollowed me from within. I'd wake gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the taste of raw meat in my mouth. Thomas visited regularly, bringing fresh medicine bags and teaching me protective rituals from his tribe's traditions. We never spoke directly of what happened, but he seemed to know anyway. "The spirit world has noticed you now," he warned one evening as we sat on my porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "You walked between worlds and returned. That marks a person." I fingered the small antler point I now wore on a cord around my neck. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. "Will it come back?" I asked. Thomas considered the question carefully. "Not in the same form. Not for you. But such hungers never truly die. They wait, dormant, until someone suitable awakens them. And the hikers, Jake, are they gone?" he said gently, "or transformed beyond recovery? Best to remember them as they were." I nodded, accepting the truth I'd already known. Whatever remained of Jake had burned in that cabin. The hikers had likely met a similar fate before I ever began searching for them. As spring deepened into summer, the nightmares gradually subsided. My appetite, voracious after my encounter with the Wendigo, returned to normal. The strange sensitivity I'd developed, an awareness of the forest that went beyond ordinary ranger training, remained, but no longer felt threatening. Tourists flooded the park as the weather improved, keeping all rangers busy with the usual problems: lost hikers, wildlife encounters, permit violations, ordinary dangers that could be managed with training and experience. No one mentioned skinwalkers or wendigos or voices calling from the trees, but I remained vigilant. Each new missing person report triggered a cold dread that never quite dissipated even when the lost were found. Each unexplained animal death near the eastern boundary sent me reaching for the antler point at my throat. In late August, as the first hints of autumn touched the highest peaks, a young couple wandered into the ranger station. The man looked troubled. The woman kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. "We need to report something," the man began hesitantly. "We were hiking near the East Ridge and saw something." Frank caught my eye across the room. I moved closer, pretending to organize maps while listening. "A person," the woman continued. "At least, we thought it was a person at first. Standing at the edge of the trees, watching us. Too tall," the man added. "And the way it moved when we spotted it, like it was wearing a human suit that didn't quite fit," she finished, shuddering. Frank took their report professionally, assuring them he'd send a patrol to investigate. When they left, he turned to me. "You want this one?" I hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll go. Not alone," he said firmly. I didn't argue. We both knew what might be waiting. The hike to the East Ridge took most of the day. We found the couple's campsite easily enough, still intact with their tent and gear. They'd fled without stopping to pack, apparently. Beyond it, at the forest edge, we discovered tracks, human-like but distorted, too deep in some places, as if carrying impossible weight, with long, claw-tipped toes. "Familiar?" Frank asked quietly. I knelt to examine them more closely. Similar, but different somehow. Smaller. We followed the tracks cautiously. They led to a small clearing where they simply stopped, as if whatever made them had vanished into air. At the clearing's center stood a crude arrangement of stones. Not natural, definitely placed there deliberately. "What is it?" Frank asked as I approached the formation. "A marker," I replied, recognizing the pattern Thomas had once shown me. "A warning." Frank didn't question how I knew. "Warning of what?" I touched the antler point at my throat. "That the hunt isn't over." Just paused. That night, back in my cabin, I wrote everything down, from my arrival in Alaska, to the encounter on the ridge, to this latest discovery. I sealed the account in an envelope addressed to the next ranger who would occupy this post after me, because I knew now what Thomas had been trying to tell me. The Wendigo's hunger might be dormant, but it wasn't gone. It would return, seeking a new vessel, a new hunter. Next time, it might not be me in its sights, but I needed to ensure whoever faced it had some chance of understanding what they were up against. In the morning I would request a transfer, not out of fear, but strategy. The creature had marked me. I could serve as bait, drawing its attention away from Denali to wherever I went next. A calculated risk, but one I was prepared to take. As I finished writing, a soft scratching came at my door. Not claws this time, just the ordinary sound of branches brushing wood in the wind. Still, I tensed, hand moving to the gun I now kept always within reach. "Ahoti," came a voice. Not Jake's or Blackwood's, but my own, perfectly mimicked. "Let me in. I'm cold out here." I remained silent, heart pounding. "You can't run forever," my voice continued from beyond the door. "What's in you is in me. What hunts me hunts you." I approached the door cautiously, medicine bag clutched in one hand, gun in the other. Through the small window I could see nothing but darkness and swirling snow, despite the clear night sky moments before. "Show yourself," I challenged. The darkness coalesced, forming a silhouette that might have been human once. Eyes gleamed in the blackness, not red or yellow as stories might suggest, but a mirror of my own. "Until the next hunger comes," it whispered, echoing the words from the burning cabin. "I'll be waiting," I promised. The shape dissolved, darkness retreating to reveal ordinary night once more. But I knew it wasn't gone, merely withdrawing, regrouping. The hunt had entered a new phase. In the distance a wolf howled, the sound echoing across the valley. Another answered, then another, voices blending into an ancient chorus that spoke of territories defended and prey pursued. I listened, understanding now as I hadn't before. The wilderness had accepted me as one of its own. Not as prey, not as predator, but as something in between. A guardian of boundaries, a keeper of balance. I touched the antler point, feeling its subtle warmth. The Wendigo's hunger might never be truly satisfied, but neither would my vigilance. For now, that equilibrium would have to be enough. Come morning I would begin preparations to leave Alaska. Not to escape, but to extend the battleground. The skinwalker had chosen me because it recognized something kindred, a darkness I'd tried to flee. Now I would use that connection to draw it away from here, to hunting grounds of my choosing. Let it follow. Let it hunger. This time, I would be the hunter. In the quiet corners of the internet, my story circulates among those who work the wild places. Rangers, guides, search and rescue teams. Some dismiss it as fiction, a campfire tale to frighten rookies. Others recognize the truth beneath the telling. If you're reading this and feel that peculiar resonance, a pull toward remote wilderness, a need to escape what haunts you, be wary. The hungry ones are always watching, always waiting for someone suitable. And if you find yourself alone in the forest someday, hearing a familiar voice call your name from among the trees, remember, names have power. Claim yours before something else does. Ahade Begay, Park Ranger, Denali National Park and Preserve. The mountains have voices. Anyone who's spent enough time in the Great Smoky Mountains knows this truth. The wind through the ancient trees creates a language all its own. Sometimes a whisper, sometimes a howl. After 15 years as a ranger here, I've learned to listen. My name is Dakota Blackwolf, which means friend to all in Dakota Sioux. Most days, I've lived up to that name. But there are things in these mountains that no man should befriend. I still remember the day I accepted the position with the National Park Service. The recruitment officer had laid out the modest salary, barely enough to cover the loans from my environmental science degree. But then he mentioned the cabin. Rangers could live on site in one of the historic structures scattered throughout the park. The Depression-era craftsmen had built them to last, all chestnut logs and stone fireplaces, living rent-free in the middle of 800 square miles of pristine wilderness. I signed the papers that afternoon. My cabin sits in a remote corner of the Cataloochee Valley, surrounded by towering hemlocks and weather-beaten rhododendron. It's a simple one-room structure with a small kitchen, a bathroom added sometime in the 1970s, and a covered porch where I drink my coffee and watch the mist roll through the valleys each morning. For years, it was everything I needed. When my sister died suddenly 3 years ago, leaving my nephew Eli without parents, the cabin became our sanctuary. The park superintendent bent the rules to allow him to live with me, understanding my financial situation couldn't support another residence. Eli was 12 then, angry at the world and grieving deeply. I thought the mountains would heal him the way they had healed me. I was wrong. The first incident happened during Eli's second month here. He'd wandered about a quarter mile from the cabin, collecting interesting rocks, a hobby I'd encouraged to keep his mind occupied. I was chopping firewood when I heard his scream. I found him frozen in place, staring into a dense thicket of mountain laurel. "Someone's watching me," he whispered when I reached him. I scanned the area carefully. The forest seemed still, but something felt off. The birds had gone silent. No squirrels chattered from the branches. Even the ever-present crickets had ceased their constant symphony. "What did you see?" I asked, hand instinctively moving to my service weapon. "I don't know," Eli said. "It was big, standing on 2 legs, but not normal." His voice cracked. "Not human." I searched the area thoroughly but found nothing except some broken branches about 9 feet off the ground, far higher than any black bear could reach, and a single footprint in a patch of mud. 18 inches long, 5 toes, like a human foot but massive. I told myself it was a bear, had to be. The alternative wasn't something I could afford to believe, not with Eli in my care. But deep down I knew bears don't snap branches that high, and they don't leave footprints that look like giant human feet. That night I couldn't sleep. Outside, something moved through the forest around our cabin. Heavy footfalls circled us until dawn, always keeping just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. Eli huddled in my bed, terrified. I sat in the chair by the window, shotgun across my lap, listening to that methodical pattern. Crack, shuffle, pause, crack, shuffle, pause, until the first light of dawn sent whatever it was retreating into the deeper wilderness. The next morning I reported unusual bear activity near my cabin. My supervisor nodded knowingly. "Keep your food secured and make noise when you're outside. It'll move on." But I knew it wouldn't. Whatever circled our cabin hadn't been looking for food. It had been studying us. Later that week I found Ranger Tom Cassidy, a 20-year veteran of the park, drinking alone at the Cherokee Tavern just outside the park boundary. His hands trembled slightly as he nursed his whiskey. "Everything all right, Tom?" I asked, sliding onto the bar stool beside him. His eyes, bloodshot and wide, fixed on me. "You live out in Cataloochee, don't you, Dakota?" I nodded. "Heard anything strange lately?" My skin prickled. "Like what?" He leaned in close, breath sour with alcohol. "They're getting bolder, coming closer to the ranger stations. 3 hikers gone missing in 2 months. Bears?" I suggested, already knowing his answer. Tom laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "We tell folks it's bears, always bears, or they got lost, hypothermia. But you know what the Cherokee called these mountains? Shakinage, place of the blue smoke. They believed the smoke was the breath of the spirits." He drained his glass. "Not all spirits are friendly, Dakota. Some are hungry." That night, as I locked our cabin door, I remembered what an elder from the eastern band of Cherokee had once told me. "The Sasquatch walk these hills. They were here before us, and they'll be here after. They watch the 2-legged trespassers, and sometimes they do more than watch." I'd smiled politely then. Now, listening to the 2 heavy footsteps in the dark forest beyond our walls, I wasn't smiling anymore. Park rangers develop a 6th sense about danger. We learn to read the forest, a sudden silence, a particular smell on the breeze, the way animals behave before a storm. In my 15 years of service, I'd rescued lost hikers in blizzards, faced down aggressive bears, and weathered flash floods, but nothing in my training prepared me for what was coming. The first official warning came from dispatch on a muggy July afternoon. I just returned from clearing a fallen hemlock from one of the backcountry trails when my radio crackled to life. All rangers be advised of continued missing person reports in Sector 7. Maintain communication when entering the area. Repeat, maintain regular radio contact. Sector 7 encompassed the most remote northeastern corner of the park, old-growth forest that stretched into some of the most inaccessible terrain in the Appalachians. It was also directly adjacent to my cabin in Cataloochee. Later that day, I stopped by headquarters to check the incident reports. Sandra, the civilian administrator who'd been with the Park Service longer than most rangers, slid a folder across her desk when no one else was looking. 6 hikers missing in 3 months, she whispered. No bodies recovered. No traces except... She trailed off. Except what? She looked around nervously. Footprints. Big ones. And broken branches high up in the trees. They're calling it bear activity. But what? I pressed. I've worked here 30 years, Dakota. Bears don't take people without leaving blood. Bears don't carefully remove backpacks and stack them in piles. And bears sure as hell don't break branches 15 feet off the ground. That night I went through the folder while Eli slept. Each report followed a similar pattern. Experienced hikers vanishing from established trails. Small personal items found arranged in strange patterns. And footprints. Each measurement meticulously recorded, then dismissed as possible bear tracks, deformed by rain. But I knew better. The patterns matched what I'd seen near our cabin. The following morning, I took Eli fishing at a small mountain lake about 2 miles from our cabin. He'd been having nightmares about the tall people in the trees, as he called them. I thought a normal day outdoors might help. We'd been casting our lines for about an hour when I noticed a man watching us from across the lake. He was tall and gaunt, with a long gray beard that reached the middle of his chest. He wore faded flannel despite the summer heat and carried no fishing gear. "Who's that?" Eli asked, noticing my attention shift. "Not sure," I said, waving cautiously to the stranger. The man didn't wave back. Instead, he raised his hand, palm out, in what looked like a warning gesture. Then he turned and disappeared into the tree line with surprising speed for someone his age. "Stay here," I told Eli, leaving him with our gear as I circled the small lake. I found the spot where the man had been standing. The ground there was covered in strange symbols, scratched into the dirt. Circles within circles, crude stick figures, and what looked like footprints with 5 elongated toes. Beneath a rock was a small leather pouch. Inside were dried herbs, bone fragments, and a yellowed piece of paper with a handwritten message. "They hunt when the moon wanes. Stay inside. Metal repels them. Salt at doors and windows. They mimic voices to lure. They are not alone." I pocketed the pouch and returned to Eli, trying to appear casual while my mind raced. That night, after my nephew was asleep, I pulled out our topographical maps and began marking the locations of all disappearances from the reports. They formed a distinct pattern, a spiral centering directly on the high ridge above our cabin. Later, unable to sleep, I stepped onto the porch. The quarter moon cast feeble light through the trees. As I stood there, the forest fell completely silent. No insects, no nightbirds, nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then, from the darkness beyond our clearing, came a noise that made my blood freeze. A perfect imitation of Eli's voice, calling for help. "Uncle Dakota, help me. I'm hurt." My hand was on the doorknob, my body already moving toward the sound, when I remembered the warning. They mimic voices to lure. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and sat with my shotgun, listening as Eli's cries for help gradually transformed into something else. A guttural, inhuman sound of frustration that echoed through the valley until dawn. The real Eli slept through it all. But when he woke, he looked at me with frightened eyes. "They were trying to trick you last night," he said simply. "They want to take you away like they did the others." "What others?" I asked, my mouth dry. Eli looked down at his hands. "The ones they tell stories about at school. The hikers who go missing. Tommy's dad says they get eaten." I made a decision then. That morning, I went to my supervisor and requested transfer to a different ranger station, somewhere closer to the main visitor areas, with more people around. I cited Eli's need to be closer to his school. My supervisor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is this about the incidents in Sector 7? I chose my words carefully. "I just think it would be better for Eli to be around more people. The isolation has been hard on him." "The Cataloochee cabin is one of our most desirable posts," he reminded me. "Rangers wait years for that assignment." "Are you sure?" I wasn't sure of anything except the growing dread in my gut, but I nodded anyway. He sighed. "I'll see what I can do. Might take a few weeks to arrange. As I left his office, I overheard him on the phone. Yeah, another one getting spooked. Black wolf this time. One of our best, too. That evening, I returned to find strange markings carved into the trees surrounding our cabin. The same circular patterns I'd seen at the lake. And nailed to our door was a small wooden figure, crudely carved to resemble a tall, thin creature with elongated limbs. I knew then we wouldn't have a few weeks to wait for a transfer. Whatever was out there in the darkness, it had marked us for attention. The first direct encounter happened 3 nights after finding the wooden figure. I'd taken to sleeping in short shifts, constantly alert for any unusual sounds. Eli had stopped going to school. The 40-minute drive along isolated forest roads felt too dangerous now. The park superintendent had been understanding about my request for emergency leave. Though I'd been vague about the reasons, it was just after 2 a.m. when the scratching began. Faint at first, like tree branches against the cabin's wooden siding. Then rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Moving slowly around the perimeter of our home. I slid from bed, careful not to wake Eli, and peered through the narrow gap in the curtains. The forest beyond our small clearing was pitch black. The motion sensor lights I'd installed remained dark, which meant nothing large enough to trigger them had approached. Yet the scratching continued. Now at the back of the cabin, I grabbed my shotgun and flashlight, moving silently to the rear window. As I reached to pull back the curtain, a massive shadow fell across the glass, a silhouette blocking the faint moonlight. I froze, finger resting lightly on the trigger. The shadow remained motionless for several heartbeats. Then 5 enormous fingers splayed across the window, each ending in a claw-like nail. The hand was at least twice the size of my own, covered in dark hair, with leathery skin visible on the palm. My breath caught in my throat. The fingers began to tap against the glass. Tap, 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 matching the rhythm I'd heard earlier. "What do you want?" I whispered, though I knew communication was futile. The tapping stopped. The massive hand withdrew. For a moment I thought it had left, but then a face pressed against the window. A face that will haunt me until the day I die. It was vaguely human in structure, but wrong in every proportion. The forehead sloped sharply backward. Deep-set eyes reflected red in the darkness like a nocturnal animal's. The nose was flat and wide, with flaring nostrils. But it was the mouth that terrified me most. A lipless gash filled with yellowed teeth too numerous and too sharp for any natural creature. We stared at each other, separated only by a thin pane of glass. Its breath fogged the window in rhythmic bursts. Then its mouth moved, contorting into what might have been a smile, though the expression contained no warmth, only predatory anticipation. In a swift motion, I yanked the curtain shut and fired a warning shot through the ceiling. Eli bolted upright in bed, screaming. Outside, something large crashed through the underbrush, retreating into the forest. The motion lights finally activated, illuminating nothing but swaying branches. "They're getting closer," Eli whispered, clutching his blanket like a shield. I nodded, unable to deny it any longer. "Pack a bag. Essential items only. We're leaving at first light." "They won't let us go," he said with disturbing certainty. "We're going to try anyway." I spent the rest of the night making preparations, loading the truck, gathering our most important possessions, and trying to reach other rangers on the radio. The storm that had been threatening for days had finally arrived, bringing with it torrential rain that made communication impossible. The landline had gone dead days ago, and cell service had never reached this far into the backcountry. We were on our own. As dawn broke, casting gray light through the downpour, I ushered Eli to the truck. The forest around us seemed to watch with malevolent intent. The rain had turned the service road to mud, but the truck had 4-wheel drive. We could make it to the main park road if we were careful. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, then died. "No, no, no," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. I popped the hood and stepped out into the rain. What I found made my stomach lurch. The engine components had been methodically dismantled, spark plugs removed, battery cables severed. It would have taken tools and time. It would have taken intelligence. "What's wrong?" Eli called from inside. "Stay in the truck," I ordered, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved except the rain-lashed branches. I retreated to the cabin and tried the radio again, frantically spinning through channels. Through the static, I caught fragments of conversation, other rangers discussing a situation developing in Catalucci, and extraction team mobilizing. Then nothing but crackling emptiness. "They're coming for us," Eli said from the doorway, his young face gaunt with fear. "I can feel them watching. Help is coming too," I assured him, though I wasn't convinced the extraction team I'd heard mentioned was meant for us. As the day wore on, the storm intensified. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunderclaps that shook our small cabin. Between these natural explosions, I heard other sounds, movement in the forest, Not just from one direction, but from all around us. Coordinated, strategic, they were positioning themselves, waiting for darkness. I checked my watch. 5:42 p.m. The sun would set in less than an hour. Though the storm clouds had already plunged the forest into premature twilight, the motion sensor lights flickered as the power fluctuated with each lightning strike. "Uncle Dakota," Eli said suddenly, his voice unnaturally calm. "There's someone at the edge of the trees." I moved to the window. Through the curtain of rain I saw the old man from the lake, standing just beyond our clearing. He was soaking wet, his gray beard plastered to his chest, but he seemed unconcerned by the storm. He raised his hand, pointing urgently toward the mountains beyond our cabin, then made a gesture like he was pushing something away. "He wants us to go," Eli interpreted. "Go where?" "The truck won't start," I said. "Not by road," Eli insisted. "Through the forest. There's a trail the rangers don't know about. He showed me before." I stared at my nephew. "When did he show you this?" "In my dreams," Eli said simply. "He says they're afraid of him. He can help us, but we have to go now." I looked back at the clearing. The old man was gone, but at the exact spot where he'd been standing, a blue-white ball of light now hovered, the size of a basketball, pulsing gently in the rain. "Will-o'-the-wisp," I breathed, recognizing the phenomenon from Cherokee legends. "Spirit light said to guide the lost." "He says to follow it," Eli insisted. "Before they surround us completely." My ranger training screamed that leaving shelter in a storm was madness. Following mysterious lights into the wilderness was the exact opposite of survival protocol. But as I weighed our options, a massive lightning bolt struck a tree at the edge of our clearing. In the brilliant flash, I glimpsed them. At least a dozen tall, hair-covered figures positioned in a wide circle around our cabin. Momentarily frozen in their advance, my decision was made. I grabbed our emergency packs, handed Eli his raincoat, and took one last look at the cabin that had been our home. "Stay close to me," I told him, checking my shotgun one final time. "We follow the light, but if I say run, you run. Understand?" Eli nodded, his eyes wide but determined. Together we stepped out into the storm, toward the pulsing light that retreated slowly into the forest, leaving a faint blue trail in its wake. Behind us I heard branches breaking as our pursuers realized their quarry was escaping. A howl rose above the storm, a sound no human or known animal could make, followed by answering calls from all directions. The hunt had begun. The blue light bobbed ahead of us through the driving rain, always maintaining the same distance, close enough to follow, far enough that I couldn't make out any details beyond its eerie glow. It led us away from established trails, up steep ravines and across icy streams swollen with storm runoff. Eli moved with surprising confidence for a 15-year-old, sometimes pointing to turns before the light indicated them, as if he knew this route. "Did the old man tell you where this path leads?" I shouted over the storm, helping him scramble up a slick rock face. "To a safe place," Eli called back. "A place they can't follow." I wanted to press for details, but a noise from behind stole my attention, the crack of breaking timber followed by the distinctive sound of something large moving through the underbrush. They were gaining on us. The light abruptly changed direction, leading us into a narrow crevice between two massive boulders. The passage was so tight we had to turn sideways to squeeze through. On the other side, the path dropped steeply into a ravine I'd never encountered in all my years patrolling these mountains. "This isn't on any park map," I muttered, more to myself than to Eli. "The Cherokee knew about it," he replied. "The old man says they avoided this place, called it the breath of the sleeping giant." As if responding to the name, the ravine filled with swirling mist that rose from the ground itself, warm vapor that smelled faintly of sulfur. A geothermal vent, I realized. Rare in the Smokies, but not unheard of. The blue light dimmed slightly as it entered the mist, but remained visible enough to follow. The fog gave us some cover, but it also reduced visibility to mere feet. I kept one hand on Eli's shoulder as we descended deeper into the unknown gorge. Behind us, I heard frustrated howls. The creatures had reached the narrow passage but seemed reluctant to enter. "They don't like this place," Eli said, his voice echoing strangely in the mist. "But they won't stop. Not now that they've chosen us." "Chosen us for what?" I asked, dreading the answer. Eli's face was grim beyond his years. "The old man says they need to replace their own. They take people who can survive in the wilderness. Rangers, hunters, they change them." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain soaking my clothes. "Change them into what?" Before Eli could answer, a rock clattered down the slope behind us. I spun, raising my shotgun toward the sound. Through the swirling mist I caught glimpses of movement. Tall, bipedal figures picking their way down the ravine wall. They moved with unnatural grace, using their long limbs to navigate terrain that would challenge even the most experienced climber. "Run!" I pushed Eli ahead of me, following the blue light that suddenly accelerated its pace. We splashed through shallow pools of warm water, steam rising around our legs. The sulfur smell grew stronger, burning my nostrils. The mist thickened until I could barely see Eli 3 feet ahead of me. A hand grabbed my shoulder from behind, a massive, powerful grip that spun me around with terrifying strength. I fired the shotgun blindly, the blast deafening in the narrow ravine. A shriek of pain answered, and the grip loosened enough for me to tear free. I stumbled forward, calling Eli's name. No response. The blue light had vanished. Panic surged through me. I rushed ahead, shotgun at the ready, searching desperately for any sign of my nephew or our mysterious guide. The mist parted briefly, revealing a small wooden structure nestled against the ravine wall, a cabin even more ancient than the ranger stations, built from hand-hewn logs blackened with age. The door stood open. Inside, the blue light pulsed once, then disappeared. I approached cautiously, aware of movement in the mist behind me. At the threshold, I hesitated, remembering every horror story about never entering a strange dwelling in the wilderness. But a familiar voice called from within, "Uncle Dakota, hurry!" I stepped inside. The cabin consisted of a single room with a stone fireplace, rough wooden furniture, and walls covered in strange symbols similar to those I'd seen carved into trees. Eli stood beside the old man from the lake, who was lighting an oil lamp with gnarled hands. I closed the door and slid a heavy wooden bar into place. "Will that hold them?" The old man looked up, his eyes startlingly blue against his weathered face. "For a time. They fear what protects this place, but hunger drives them to boldness." "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping the shotgun ready. "My name wouldn't mean anything to you," he said, "but I've been watching them for 50 years, studying them, learning their ways." He gestured to the walls covered in diagrams and notes. "I was a park ranger too, once, until what happened to the Spearman survey team in '73. The name struck a chord. The Spearman incident. 5 rangers disappeared while mapping the eastern boundary. It's part of our training as a cautionary tale about wilderness preparedness." The old man's laugh was bitter. "Is that what they tell you now? Wilderness preparedness?" He shook his head. "I was the only survivor, found wandering, half mad with what I'd seen. They discharged me, said I'd had a psychological break." "What really happened?" I asked, lowering the shotgun slightly. His eyes took on a distant look. "We were chosen, like you and the boy. They pick carefully. People who know the forest, who can help them adapt. They're changing, you see, evolving, learning." A heavy thud against the door interrupted him. The wooden bar trembled but held. "They've found us," the old man said unnecessarily. "We don't have much time." He turned to a chest in the corner and removed a cloth-wrapped bundle. "These mountains belonged to them long before humans came. The Cherokee understood, made offerings, respected boundaries. Then the white settlers arrived, then logging companies, then the Park Service. Their territory shrank. Food became scarce." Another impact shook the door. Outside, something scraped against the cabin walls, testing for weaknesses. "They adapted," the old man continued, unwrapping the bundle to reveal an ancient-looking rifle and several metal implements I didn't recognize. "Started taking people, not just for food, for knowledge, for breeding." "Breeding?" I echoed, my stomach turning. "How do you think they learn so quickly? Why they can mimic human speech, dismantle engines?" The old man's eyes bored into mine. "They're not just animals, Ranger Black Wolf. They're something, in between, and they're getting closer to us with each generation." A section of the roof suddenly tore away, exposing us to the storm. A long, hairy arm reached through the opening. Claws extended toward Eli. I fired the shotgun, blasting the limb back through the hole. A howl of rage answered. "The cellar!" The old man shoved aside a ragged carpet, revealing a trapdoor. Quickly, Eli dropped through the opening without hesitation. I moved to follow, but the old man placed a hand on my arm. "I'll hold them here," he said, raising the ancient rifle. "The tunnel leads to the main park road. 2 miles due east. Get the boy to safety." "Come with us," I insisted. He shook his head. "My time's been borrowed for decades. Besides," a sad smile crossed his face, "someone needs to buy you time. The tunnel's collapsed in sections. You'll need to dig through." Before I could argue further, the cabin door splintered inward. Silhouetted against the storm stood the largest of the creatures I'd seen yet, at least 8 feet tall, its massive shoulders nearly filling the doorframe. Behind it, others moved in the mist, their eyes reflecting light like animals caught in headlights. "Go!" the old man shouted, firing the rifle. The creature staggered back but didn't fall. I dropped through the trapdoor, pulling it shut above me, as gunfire and inhuman screams erupted in the cabin. The old man had secured the trapdoor somehow, I heard scratching against it, but it held firm. Eli waited in the narrow earthen tunnel, his face illuminated by a small emergency light from his pack. "Will he be okay?" he whispered. I couldn't lie to him. I don't think he planned to survive this. He's buying us time. I pushed him gently forward. "We need to move." As the old man had warned, we encountered several collapsed sections, forcing us to dig through packed earth and roots. The creatures above must have heard our progress. Occasionally, the ground would vibrate with heavy footfalls pacing above us, following our path. After what felt like hours, the tunnel began to slope upward. Fresh air seeped through the earthen ceiling. We were nearing the exit. "Almost there," I encouraged Eli, who was exhausted and mud-covered. We reached a final obstacle, a cave-in that blocked the last stretch of tunnel. As we began to dig, dirt rained down from above. They had found us. They were digging too, from the surface. "Faster," I urged, clawing at the earth with desperate strength. A small opening appeared, revealing night sky. The rain had stopped, replaced by an eerie calm. I boosted Eli toward the hole. "Crawl through. Run for the road. Don't look back." "Not without you," he protested. "I'm right behind you," I promised, though I knew the opening was barely large enough for his slender frame. As Eli squirmed through the gap, claws broke through the tunnel ceiling behind me. I fired my last shotgun shell into the reaching hands, then turned to widen the exit, frantically pulling at roots and stones. Eli grabbed my wrists from outside, helping to pull me forward. The opening expanded just enough for my shoulders to pass through. I was halfway out when something seized my ankle with crushing force. "Run, Eli," I shouted, kicking desperately at whatever held me. Instead, Eli grabbed a fallen branch and swung it at the creature, trying to drag me back into the tunnel. The grip on my ankle loosened just enough for me to pull free and roll onto the forest floor. We were on a steep hillside above a winding mountain road. In the distance, headlights approached, a Park Service vehicle on night patrol. "The road," I pointed, shoving Eli ahead of me. "Run!" Behind us, the tunnel entrance erupted as massive forms burst from the earth like demons rising from the underworld. Their howls echoed through the night as we raced downhill, slipping and sliding on the damp ground. The patrol vehicle's headlights illuminated our desperate flight. I waved frantically, screaming for help. The truck skidded to a stop and 2 rangers leaped out, weapons drawn. "Behind us!" I shouted as we reached the road. The rangers raised their rifles, peering into the darkness. But the creatures had vanished, melting back into the forest they ruled. "Ranger Black Wolf?" one of them asked incredulously. "We've had search teams looking for you and your nephew for 3 days. 3 days? We'd been in that tunnel for hours at most." I looked at Eli, whose expression told me he was equally confused. "What happened up there?" the other ranger asked, staring at our mud-covered, bloodied state. I opened my mouth, then closed it. How could I explain what we'd encountered? Who would believe us? "Got caught in the storm," I said finally. "Had to find shelter. Lost track of time." The rangers exchanged glances but asked no more questions as they helped us into their vehicle. As we drove away, I looked back at the dark forest rising up the mountainside. For an instant, I thought I saw them, a line of tall figures standing at the tree line, watching our departure. Beside me, Eli shivered. "They'll wait," he whispered. "They're patient." I put my arm around his shoulders, knowing he was right. They would wait, and watch, and learn. And someday, they would choose again. The official report classified our ordeal as a disorientation incident due to severe weather conditions. Despite the search team's insistence that we'd been missing for 3 days, I maintained we'd simply lost track of time while seeking shelter from the storm. It was easier than telling the truth. The park superintendent granted my transfer request immediately. Within a week, Eli and I relocated to a ranger station near the main visitor center at Sugarlands, a bustling hub of tourist activity where the constant flow of people provided a sense of security I hadn't realized I'd been craving. Our new quarters were modern and comfortable, if smaller than the Catalucci cabin. Eli enrolled in the local high school, where he quickly made friends and seemed to be adjusting well. On the surface, we were moving forward, but the nightmares continued for both of us. In mine, I was always running through endless fog, pursued by something I couldn't see but could feel getting closer with each labored breath. Sometimes I'd hear Eli calling for help, only to find one of them waiting instead, its lipless mouth contorted in that terrible approximation of a smile. Eli never discussed his dreams, but I often found him awake in the middle of the night, sketching obsessively in a notebook he kept hidden under his mattress. One evening while he was at a friend's house, my concern overwhelmed my respect for his privacy. I found the notebook and flipped it open. Page after page was filled with detailed drawings of the creatures, anatomical studies that would impress a trained biologist. He'd labeled body parts, noted movement patterns, even sketched what appeared to be social hierarchies. But most disturbing were the maps, precise renderings of the park with X marks indicating what could only be den locations and hunting territories. The final pages contained drawings of the old man's cabin, including the symbols that had covered its walls. Beneath these, Eli had written, "Protection signs, must remember." I replaced the notebook before he returned, unsure of how to address what I'd seen. Was this his way of processing trauma, or something more concerning? My own coping mechanism involved research. I spent hours in the park's archives, searching for records of similar incidents throughout the Smokies' history. Most were categorized as animal attacks or wilderness accidents, but a pattern emerged for those with eyes to see it. A cycle of disappearances every 15 to 20 years, always involving people with outdoor experience, always in the most remote areas of the park. I found the original reports from the Spearman incident of 1973. 5 rangers gone, 1 survivor who exhibited signs of extreme psychological distress and made claims of non-human intelligent creatures. The survivor's name had been redacted, but I knew it was the old man who'd helped us escape. My colleague Tom Cassidy noticed my research. One evening he invited me for coffee after our shift ended. "You're digging into things best left buried, Takota," he said once we were alone. "Trust me on this." "You know something," I challenged him. "That night at the Cherokee Tavern, you tried to warn me." Tom stared into his coffee. "My grandfather was Cherokee. He used to tell stories about the Nununui, the stone people. Said they were here before us, would be here after us. Different from humans but intelligent, territorial." He glanced around nervously. "The Park Service has an unwritten policy about certain areas. We mark them as environmentally sensitive, restrict access. Truth is, they're buffer zones." "Buffer zones?" I echoed. "Boundaries," Tom clarified. "Places where our world meets theirs." The old-timers knew. Left offerings at certain spots. Tobacco, cornmeal. Kept the peace. He leaned forward. After the park was established, those practices stopped. That's when the disappearances started. "Why doesn't the Park Service acknowledge this?" I demanded. Tom's laugh was hollow. "Can you imagine the headlines? Bigfoot colony protected by federal government. Tourism would collapse. Or worse, every armed hunter in the South would flood in looking for trophies." I thought of the creature's face pressed against my window. "They're not just animals." "No," Tom agreed. "And that's what terrifies the higher-ups. What do you do with something that's almost human but not? What rights would they have? What territory? It's easier to deny they exist." "The old man," I said. "The one who helped us. Do you know who he was?" Tom nodded slowly. "Walter Blackburn. Legendary tracker. After the Spearman incident, he went native, built that cabin, spent decades studying them. Park administration lets him be. He's sort of an unofficial guardian of the boundary." "He saved us," I said quietly. "Probably died doing it. Wouldn't be surprised if that's how he wanted to go." Tom finished his coffee. "My advice? Take your nephew and get as far from these mountains as you can. These creatures have long memories." 6 months passed. Winter descended on the Smokies, bringing snow to the higher elevations and a blessed slowdown in park visitation. Eli thrived in his new school, showing a particular aptitude for biology and anthropology. I threw myself into my ranger duties, volunteering for the busiest visitor areas where human contact was constant. We never spoke about what happened in Cataloochee. Not directly. Sometimes Eli would freeze mid-action, his eyes fixed on the forest edge as if seeing something I couldn't. But these episodes grew less frequent as time passed. I began to hope we might actually put it behind us. Then came the letter. It arrived in a weather-beaten envelope with no return address, just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single page torn from a journal, the paper yellowed with age. December 18th, 1973. They're evolving faster than I anticipated. Today I observed one using a ranger's lost radio, manipulating the dials with those elongated fingers. They learn by watching, by taking. The Park Service won't listen, so I'll stay. Document. Someone must know the truth. If you're reading this, they've chosen you too. It doesn't end with escape. They never forget a scent. Walter B. Beneath this was a fresh edition in different handwriting. The boundary is breaking. The old man is gone. The protections fail. They come soon. That night, I checked all our locks twice. Placed salt along the windowsills, remembering the warning from the old man's pouch. Metal repels them. I retrieved my service weapon from its lockbox and kept it close. Eli watched these preparations with knowing eyes. "They're coming, aren't they?" I couldn't lie to him. "I think so." He nodded, surprisingly calm. "I've been drawing them. In my dreams, the old man shows me things about them. Says I need to understand." "Understand what?" "That they're not evil." "Not exactly." Eli hesitated. They're desperate. Their numbers are dwindling. Inbreeding. They need new blood. A chill ran through me as I recalled the old man's words about breeding. That doesn't excuse taking people. No, Eli agreed. But it explains why they're so focused on us. On rangers, scientists, woodsmen, people who could survive their world, pass on knowledge. He pulled out his notebook, opened to a page I hadn't seen, a detailed drawing of a younger creature. Its features a disturbing blend of human and something else. What is that? I whispered, though I feared I knew. Hybrid, Eli said simply. They can crossbreed with humans. That's why they take people who won't be missed, who know the wilderness. The implications made my blood run cold. How do you know this? The old man showed me. In dreams. Eli closed the notebook. He says there's a way to restore the boundary, strengthen it, but it requires a choice. Before he could elaborate, the power went out, plunging our quarters into darkness. Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow against the windows with increasing intensity. Winter storm or something else. I couldn't be sure. I fumbled for my flashlight as Eli moved to the window. They're here, he said quietly. I joined him, peering into the swirling snow. At first I saw nothing. Then movement at the edge of the parking lot. Tall figures moving with that distinctive gait, too fluid for their size. I counted 6 before they vanished behind the maintenance building. Get away from the window, I ordered, pulling Eli back. We need to call for backup. The landline was dead. Cell service showed no bars. Unusual even for the mountains. We were cut off. Uncle Dakota, Eli said, his voice strangely calm. I need to tell you something. About the old man. About why he helped us. A heavy thud against our door interrupted him. Not an attack, but a deliberate knock. 3 slow raps. I raised my weapon. Who's there? No answer. Just another set of knocks. Then a voice, distorted but recognizable as an attempt at human speech. Eli. Come. Chosen. My nephew's face went pale. They know my name. Another voice, this one more fluid, almost perfect in its mimicry. Dakota Blackwolf. Protector. We offer exchange. What exchange? I called, finger resting on the trigger. The boy for the boundary. He has seen. He knows. Eli gripped my arm. The dreams. The old man showed me how to restore the boundary markers, the symbols that keep them in their territory, us in ours. But it requires someone who understands both worlds. What are you saying? I demanded. I have to go with him, learn the old ways, reset the boundaries. His eyes met mine, resolute beyond his 15 years. Or they'll keep coming, taking people. The boundary gets weaker every year. Absolutely not. I pulled him away from the door. We'll find another way. Outside, the creatures began a rhythmic pounding against our quarters. Not just the door now, but windows, walls, even the roof. The entire structure shook with their coordinated assault. There is no other way, Eli insisted. The old man tried for 50 years. One person has to live in both worlds, maintain the balance, like the Cherokee did before the park came. I'll do it, I said immediately. Not you. Eli shook his head. It has to be me. They've already connected with me through dreams. The old man chose me. A window shattered in the bedroom, letting in a blast of frigid air. They were breaking through. I won't let you sacrifice yourself, I insisted, pulling him toward the bathroom, the only room without windows. It's not sacrifice, Eli said, resisting. The old man lived decades this way, moving between worlds, and I'll be helping people, preventing more disappearances, more deaths. He gripped my shoulders. Uncle Dakota, this is why we were led to his cabin, why he saved us. He needed a successor. Another window gave way. The creatures were inside now. I could hear them moving through our quarters, their breathing heavy in the darkness. Eli reached for the doorknob. I need to do this. I blocked his path, weapon raised. They'll kill you. No. His certainty was unnerving. They need me alive. Need what I know. He pulled out his notebook, pressed it into my hands. Keep this. If anything happens to me, find someone else who can see them, who can dream with them. The bathroom door burst open. I raised my weapon, but Eli pushed it down. Don't, he pleaded. It will only make it worse. In the doorway stood the largest of the creatures, the same one I'd seen at the cabin. In the flashlight's beam, I fully comprehended its otherness. The powerfully built body covered in dark hair, the 2 long limbs, the face that approached human but missed in ways that triggered deep instinctive revulsion. It extended a massive hand toward Eli. No. I moved to intervene, but 2 more creatures appeared, holding me back with terrifying strength. It's okay, Uncle Dakota, Eli said, his voice steady despite the tears on his cheeks. I'm not afraid. Eli, please, I'll come back, he promised, when I've learned enough, when I've reset the boundaries. He stepped toward the creature, They're not monsters. Not exactly. Just different. Fighting extinction the only way they know how. The creature's hand closed gently around Eli's shoulder. My nephew looked back at me one last time. Tell them I got lost in the storm. That you searched but couldn't find me. His smile was sad beyond his years. And don't come looking. Not until I contact you. He took him then, moving with surprising gentleness. I fought against the creatures holding me, but their grip was unbreakable. Through the shattered window, I watched as they led Eli into the swirling snow, their tall forms gradually disappearing into the white void of the storm. When they were gone, the creatures released me. One lingered in the doorway, its eyes reflecting amber in my flashlight beam. It made a gesture, touching its chest, then pointing to the forest, then to me. A promise? A warning? I couldn't tell. Then it too was gone, leaving me alone with the howling wind and the knowledge that my nephew had crossed a boundary few humans ever approached, let alone traversed. The storm raged for 3 days. Search parties found no trace of Eli despite my frantic insistence that he'd been lost in the blizzard. Eventually the search was scaled back, then formally suspended. Another tragic statistic added to the park's history of disappearances. I requested transfer back to the Catalucci cabin, surprising everyone. Too many memories here, I explained, which wasn't entirely a lie. Now I live where it all began, maintaining my ranger duties while studying Eli's notebook, learning the boundary symbols, watching the forest for signs. Twice I found small items on my porch. A carved wooden figure, a pouch of unfamiliar herbs, signs that he's still out there, learning, surviving. Sometimes, when the mist rolls through the valleys at dawn, I catch glimpses of movement among the trees, tall figures watching from a distance. I leave offerings at the edge of my clearing. Salt, metal objects, symbols carved into fallen logs, maintaining the boundary, waiting for Eli's return. The mountains have voices. Anyone who's spent enough time in the Great Smoky Mountains knows this truth. But now I understand that some of those voices aren't the wind through ancient trees or the call of native wildlife. They're the voices of those who were here before us, who will be here after us, who watch from the shadows as we trespass in their domain. And sometimes, if you listen closely on still nights, you might hear a human voice among them, the voice of a boy who walks between worlds, working to restore the ancient balance between their kind and ours. My name is Dakota Blackwolf. I was a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains, and they are still here, watching us all.